The Nevada night does not whisper, it listens. The silence here is not an absence, but a presence. It settles over the vast, rolling expanse of desert like a heavy velvet blanket, absorbing the distant hum of the last highway cruiser and the scuttle of nocturnal creatures in the brush. Above, the sky is not merely dark, but an infinite well of black velvet punctured by countless diamond-hard stars. In this remoteness, the Milky Way is not a faint smear, but a vibrant, cosmic river of light, so clear and bright it feels as if you could reach up and let its cool dust trickle through your fingers. This is a landscape that holds its secrets close. The ancient, weathered mountains stand as silent sentinels, their jagged outlines etched against the star field like the teeth of some slumbering giant. The dry air, crisp and cool, carries the ghostly scent of sagebrush and cooled earth. Time seems to move differently here, slower, measured not by ticking clocks, but by the imperceptible creep of shadows cast by starlight. It's a place that encourages contemplation, a feeling of being both profoundly insignificant and yet uniquely alone with the universe. For most, this desert represents emptiness, a barren stretch to be crossed quickly. But for a select few, the truckers on lonely routes, the astronomers at hidden observatories, and the residents of small, dust-blown towns, this emptiness is an illusion. They sense the weight beneath the stillness. They hear stories carried on the wind, stories of strange lights that dance low over the mesas, moving in ways that defy the lumbering flight of aircraft or the graceful arc of satellites. They speak in hushed tones about deep, resonant booms that shake window panes with no storm cloud in sight, and of fleeting glimpses of unmarked, matte black vehicles sliding along forbidden service roads. On a night like this, under this cathedral of stars, the line between myth and reality feels thin, almost porous. The vast, open space plays tricks on the mind, making the impossible seem momentarily plausible. What if, some wonder, the true purpose of this overwhelming silence is not to signify nothingness, but to mask something? What if the whispering winds are not just carrying tales, but are trying to muffle sounds that rise from deep below, the hum of unnatural machinery, the echoes of conversations about technologies not of this world? It is here, in this paradoxical heart of American emptiness, that some of the nation's most profound secrets were once rumored to be buried. Not in vaults of steel and concrete, but in the very earth itself, hidden beneath the shifting sands and sun-baked clay. The desert's stillness, its perfect, listening silence, becomes the perfect camouflage. For who would think to look for the most revolutionary discovery in human history in a place that outwardly promises nothing but rock, scrub, and endless sky? But beneath this peaceful desert sky, something impossible was about to surface. And it would begin not with a spectacular explosion of light, but with the quiet, professional curiosity of one man. A man whose life was anchored in the rational world of physics and proof, who was about to walk into a reality that would dismantle his understanding of both. The desert was waiting, holding its breath, as the first domino prepared to fall, setting in motion a chain of events that would ripple through decades and forever alter the landscape of the unknown. That man was Robert Scott Lazar, though the world would come to know him simply as Bob. Before the storm of controversy, the death threats, and the indelible mark on UFO lore, he was, by all accounts, a remarkably ordinary man with an extraordinary mind. Picture him not as a shadowy whistleblower from a spy novel, but as the bright, curious kid from the neighborhood who was always taking things apart to see how they worked. His was a curiosity that evolved from tinkering with car engines in his youth to a deep, formal understanding of the forces that govern our universe. Bob's path was one of applied intellect. He studied physics and electronics, not in the ivory towers of theoretical abstraction, but with his sleeves rolled up, focused on how principles translated into functional machinery. This practical bent led him to the hallowed grounds of Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, a name synonymous with the very birth of the atomic age. Here, amidst some of the brightest scientific minds on the planet, Bob wasn't a tenured professor publishing dense papers. He was a technician, a hands-on expert. He operated a proton particle accelerator, a complex device that hurls subatomic particles at tremendous speeds to probe the fundamental building blocks of matter. This detail is crucial. It paints a portrait of a man deeply embedded in the world of Shijing empirical evidence. His daily reality was one of calibrated instruments, repeatable Shijing experimental results, and the meticulous language of engineering. He was a believer in the scientific method, in the tangible, the provable. In his off hours, he embodied the entrepreneurial spirit of the 1980s, running a small photo lab, and even dabbling in ventures like a mobile car wash. He owned a jet car, a rocket-powered vehicle he would race on the dry lake beds, a testament to his love for raw power and speed, but speed governed by known physics and chemical reactions. He was, in essence, a classic American tinkerer-scientist. He had a home, a life, bills to pay, and a career built on demonstrable skill. He moved in circles that valued credentials and proven ability. There was nothing in his outward demeanor that suggested a fabricator or a fantasist. He was a professional who spoke the language of neutrons and volts, not little green men. This grounding in the mundane makes what comes next so profoundly dissonant. It's the stark contrast between the rational, measured world he inhabited and the incredible narrative he would later present that forms the core of his story's enduring intrigue. The man who would soon claim to have worked on alien spacecraft was, at his core, a physicist who believed in the rules. He found beauty in equations and reliability in well-timed ignition. His world was one of cause and effect, of predictable outcomes. Little did he know, a phone call would soon turn his world upside down, pulling him from the clean, logical lines of particle trails and into a shadowy realm where the rules of physics, as he understood them, were merely suggestions, and where the very proof of his experience would become a target for erasure. The offer, when it came, was shrouded in a professional vagueness that itself raised questions. It wasn't a public job listing or a headhunter's call for a typical corporate position. The contact, as Lazar would later describe, felt more like a tap on the shoulder from a hidden world, a world that had apparently been quietly observing his particular blend of skills. The initial approach was cloaked in the language of advanced government research, a think tank, environment working on cutting-edge propulsion systems. The specifics were deliberately scant, a common tactic in high-security sectors, but the implication was clear. This was work of immense importance and sensitivity. What followed was a vetting process that felt both meticulously thorough and strangely detached. There were meetings with serious, well-dressed individuals in unremarkable offices. The questions delved not just into his professional expertise and academic history, but also into his personal life, his finances, his associations. It was a security clearance procedure, but one conducted with an unusual intensity, as if they were measuring not just his loyalty, but his psychological resilience. References were checked with a quiet thoroughness that suggested his entire life was being turned over page by page. Yet, throughout this process, the actual nature of the work remained a silhouette. They spoke of revolutionary technology and national security imperatives, but the core subject, the what and the why, was artfully obscured behind a curtain of need-to-know protocol. For Bob, a scientist and an engineer, this ambiguity was a potent lure. The promise of working on the very frontier of propulsion technology, of touching ideas that were decades ahead of public scientific understanding, was an irresistible siren song. It appealed directly to the core of his identity, the problem solver, the innovator, the man who wanted to see how things worked at the very limit of possibility. Alongside this professional excitement, however, flickered a low current of apprehension. The sheer opacity of the process, the gravity in the handler's demeanors, and the absolute insistence on secrecy signaled that this was no ordinary defense contract. He was stepping through a doorway, and he could sense it closing firmly behind him. He was presented with a stack of documents thicker than any he had encountered before. These were security agreements, but their language carried extraordinary weight. They spoke of perpetual secrecy, of crimes under the Espionage Act, of severe legal consequences for any unauthorized disclosure, ever. Signing them felt less like accepting a job and more like willingly entering a gilded cage of silence. It was a moment of profound choice, to step back into his known, comprehensible world, or to step forward into a promised land of scientific marvels, a land whose borders were defined by threats of imprisonment. His curiosity, that defining trait, tipped the scale. With a signature, the ordinary life of Robert Lazar receded. He was given instructions, a time, and a location for his first day. The destination was not an office complex or a laboratory campus, but a remote corner of the Nevada Test and Training Range, adjacent to the already mythical Area 51. They called the specific facility S4. What awaited him at S4 would challenge everything he thought he knew about reality, beginning not with a flying saucer, but with a simple, terrifying act of stepping through a door that scanned the very essence of his being. The journey to the facility was a masterclass in controlled access and psychological disorientation. Bob did not drive himself. He was collected, a passenger in a windowless, unmarked van with seats that faced inward. The ride was long, a muffled, rumbling progression over what felt like rough, unpaved roads. Time and distance became abstract, impossible to gauge. The sole connection to the outside world was the driver, a silent figure who communicated only through a secure intercom, issuing terse instructions. The deliberate sensory deprivation served a clear purpose: to ensure that even if one wanted to retrace the route, the twisting, turning path through the restricted desert would be impossible to map. The transition from desert to facility was not marked by a gate or a sign, but by a descent. The van eventually slowed and came to a stop inside what sounded like a large, enclosed space. The echo of the engine changed. The rear doors opened not to sunlight and air, but to the sterile, fluorescent-lit interior of an underground garage or hangar bay. The atmosphere was instantly different. Cool, dry, filtered air carrying the faint, metallic tang of machinery and ozone. He was met by security personnel whose demeanor was professional to the point of being robotic. Their eyes assessed him without warmth. He was a package containing a security clearance, to be processed and delivered. The security protocols that followed were like nothing he had experienced, even at Los Alamos. It was a multi-layered ritual of verification. Standard ID checks gave way to biometrics, fingerprint scans, retinal patterns. Documents were inspected with devices that seemed to look through the plastic of his badges. He was led through a series of progressively more secure checkpoints, each requiring a new code, a new scan, a new silent nod from an armed guard behind thick glass. The silence was profound, broken only by the electronic chirps of scanners and the heavy thunk of magnetically sealed doors releasing. It was a process designed not just to keep people out, but to impress upon those allowed in the absolute, unforgiving weight of the secrecy they were now enveloped by. His first true impressions of S4, once through the final checkpoint, were a mixture of stark utilitarianism and profound strangeness. The corridors were wide, clean, and lit with a cold, shadowless light. The walls were a uniform gray, interrupted only by numbered doors and the occasional security panel. There were no windows, no sense of day or night. Yet, interspersed with the mundane offices and briefing rooms were doorways that led into vast, hangar-like spaces. From these, he caught fleeting glimpses of shapes under tarps, of unusual, non-reflective materials, and of workstations equipped with tools and instrumentation he couldn't immediately identify. The air hummed with a low-frequency vibration that was felt in the bones more than heard, the sound of immense, hidden power. The place felt less like a research base and more like a vault, a museum and a workshop for artifacts that defied categorization. He was given a brief, brisk orientation, a list of code names for projects and areas, and a reminder that curiosity had strict, inviolable boundaries. He was to go only where his badge allowed, ask only the questions necessary for his assigned task. The message was clear: you are here to work on a piece of the puzzle. You will never see the full picture. The immensity of the secret he had stepped into was now a physical space surrounding him, its walls both real and metaphorical. He stood there, a physicist in a labyrinth of the unknown, his mind already racing to analyze, to understand the scant data his senses could gather. But nothing could prepare him for what he was about to touch. A piece of technology that would make the imposing security, the silent guards, and the humming vaults seem like merely the outer shell of a mystery that went far, far deeper. His introduction to the core of the mystery was not a dramatic unveiling of a gleaming starship, but a more intimate, and in some ways more unsettling, encounter. It was a device used to control access to one of the most secure analytical labs within S4. They called it a hand scanner, but the term felt hopelessly inadequate, a human label slapped onto something profoundly other. It was mounted beside a featureless metallic door, unadorned and functional in appearance. A slightly curved plate at waist height, about the size of a dinner plate, with no visible seams, buttons, or readouts. The first time he was instructed to use it, the experience was subtly wrong. A standard biometric scanner on Earth might read a fingerprint or a palm print, using light or capacitance. This was different. As he placed his hand flat against the surface, the material itself was cool, but not metallic. It had a peculiar, almost organic give, like polished bone or dense resin. There was no beep, no click, no flash of light. Instead, a sensation began, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled up through the bones of his hand and arm, a hum that seemed to sync with his own pulse for a fraction of a second. It wasn't painful, but it was deeply invasive, a feeling of being momentarily mapped not just on the surface, but somehow through the tissue, the density, the very biological signature of his being. The door would then slide open with a near-silent hiss, acknowledging an identity verified on a level far beyond mere patterns on skin. To his trained, analytical mind, the device presented an immediate cascade of questions with no logical answers. What was the energy source? There were no visible power connections, no wires leading into the wall or the unit itself. What was the scanning medium? It didn't appear to use lasers, cameras, or thermal imaging in any conventional sense. The mechanism was completely sealed. There were no moving parts, no apertures to collect dust or debris. It seemed to be a single, flawless piece of something. The material defied simple categorization. It was neither plastic nor metal nor ceramic, but something with properties of each. Most strikingly, it showed absolutely nowhere. In a high-traffic area, a human-made scanner would show scratches, smudges, signs of use. This surface was perpetually pristine, as if repelling dust and time itself. This hand scanner became, for Bob, a tangible touchstone of the impossible. It was a piece of hardware he interacted with daily, a mundane yet extraordinary key. Its very existence was a silent, relentless argument against the mundane. Every time his hand met that cool, humming surface, it was a physical confirmation that the rules here were different. The sciences of materials engineering, biometry, and even basic physics, as he knew them, were insufficient to explain this single, unassuming device guarding a doorway. It was a proof of concept standing in plain sight, a fragment of a much larger, unspoken truth. It demonstrated a technological integration so seamless, so far beyond human manufacturing capability, that it pointed unequivocally to a source that was not of this world. This device would become the key to proving everything, and losing everything, a piece of evidence so potent that its mere description would make him a target. The knowledge itself became a physical burden, a weight settled in the chest that no one else could see. Classified information is not merely data to be stored in the mind. It is a live wire, charged with potential energy that must be perpetually insulated from the outside world. For Bob, the fantastic nature of what he was seeing, the hand scanner, the sport models under tarps, the briefings on Elemental 115, created a profound cognitive dissonance. He possessed two parallel realities, the mundane one of home, bills, and friendships, and the clandestine one of inverted physics and non-human technology. Juggling them required a constant, exhausting internal vigilance. The oath of secrecy he had signed was no mere formality. It was a cage constructed of legal language. It echoed in his thoughts during quiet moments. The Espionage Act was not an abstract threat, but a specific sword of Damocles, its penalties detailed in cold, bureaucratic prose. This oath severed the most fundamental human impulse when confronted with the extraordinary, the desire to share, to discuss, to seek validation. He could not turn to a colleague over lunch and whisper, "You won't believe what I saw today." He could not ask his wife for her perspective on an engineering problem that defied known science. The secret created an invisible, impermeable wall between him and every other person in his life. This fostered a deep, gnawing internal conflict. On one side was the instinct for self-preservation and professional integrity. He had given his word, and the consequences of breaking it were dire, encompassing not just legal ruin but, he suspected, far more sinister repercussions. On the other side was a growing, scientist conviction that the truth itself was a living entity with a right to be known. What he was learning wasn't just a military secret like a new missile design. It was a paradigm-shattering revelation about humanity's place in the cosmos, about the nature of reality itself. Was keeping such a secret for the vague notion of national security an act of loyalty, or was it a betrayal of the human species' right to understand its own existence? The isolation was the most corrosive effect. Secrecy transforms you. You begin to watch your own words, editing conversations in real time, fearing a casual slip. Social gatherings, once a source of relaxation, become minefields. Laughter feels distant, conversations trivial. You live with a constant, low-grade anxiety that you are being watched, that your phone might be tapped, that a wrong question from a friend might be a test. The person you were before begins to feel like a memory, a role you play while the real you, the one who has touched the impossible, lives in a silent, solitary vault within your own mind. You carry the cosmos's greatest secret, and in doing so, you become a stranger to the world, and at times, to yourself. He would drive home from the desert under the same vast Nevada sky, now pregnant with a terrifying meaning, and feel utterly alone. The stars were no longer just beautiful, they were signposts, and he knew what was parked behind some of them. The weight pressed down, a solitary atlas bearing a globe of forbidden knowledge. Yet, within that weight, a spark of defiance began to glow. For while some secrets are meant to protect, others are meant to control. And some secrets are too important to keep buried, because they don't belong to a government or a program. They belong to everyone. The craft was not kept in a brightly lit museum display, but rather existed in the shadowy half-light of a dedicated hangar bay, as if the very illumination was wary of it. It rested on three delicate-looking, curved landing struts that seemed to emerge seamlessly from the hull, giving the impression it had grown them rather than deployed them. It was a disk, yes, but that simple geometric term failed to capture its essence. This was not the lumpy, riveted flying saucer of 1950s movie posters. Its form was a perfect, flowing curve, a lenticular shape that was at once utterly simple and infinitely complex. There were no seams, no weld lines, no panel joints, no visible windows or ports. It appeared to have been cast or grown as a single, unified piece. The surface was what captivated and unsettled the scientific mind. It was a matte, grayish-silver material that defied direct description. It didn't shine, but it didn't absorb light either. Light seemed to cling to it, sliding across its curves in a liquid, oil-slick fashion. If you stared at one spot, the color appeared uniform, but as you moved your head, subtle hues would bloom and fade. Soft whispers of amber, pale blue, or a dull copper sheen would ghost across the surface before vanishing, like the afterimage of a ripple on dark water. It was as if the material was interacting with the ambient electromagnetic field in a way no terrestrial metal ever could. The scale of it, once you stood beside it, was both intimate and imposing. It was not gargantuan. He estimated its diameter at roughly 40 to 50 feet, with a central height of about 15 feet tapering to thin, knife-edged rims. It was a size that felt strangely purposeful, large enough to contain systems and possibly occupants, yet small enough to be agile, to slip through an atmosphere with minimal disruption. You could walk its circumference in a minute, yet its presence dominated the vast hangar. Touching it, on the rare occasion he was permitted with gloves, was an eerie experience. The material was cool to the touch, but not with the biting cold of metal. It was a neutral temperature, and it transmitted a faint, almost imperceptible vibration, a hum so deep and low it was more a tremor in the fingertips than a sound, like touching a sleeping creature and feeling its heartbeat. The craftsmanship, if that term even applied, was flawless to a degree that mocked human manufacturing. Under magnification, there was no grain, no microscopic tooling mark, no evidence of machining or polishing. The surface was perfectly smooth at every level of observation. There were no fasteners, no hatches, no external markings of any kind. Its aerodynamic perfection was absolute, yet it clearly had not been designed for travel within an atmosphere in any conventional sense. There were no control surfaces, no intakes, no exhaust nozzles. It was a closed system, a sealed enigma. It sat in its bay not as a machine that had been built, but as an artifact that had been manifested, a physical poem written in a language of physics humanity had yet to learn. But the exterior was merely a shell hiding something far more extraordinary, a truth that became apparent only when he was led through a hidden aperture that appeared, for a moment, in its flawless side. The propulsion system, as it was hesitantly explained to him, centered on a concept that sounded like pure science fiction: gravity wave generation and amplification. The key, they said, was a stable, super-heavy element that sat on the periodic table in a place our science had only theorized. They called it Element 115. In the craft, this material was machined, though that word felt wrong, into small, triangular wedges, each about the size of a peach pit and weighing, due to its incredible density, several hundred pounds. These wedges were the heart of the reactor. The element's unique nuclear structure, its specific number of protons and neutrons, allowed it to produce a gravitational field as a byproduct of its existence, a field that could be focused and directed. Think of it not as an engine that pushes, but as a device that manipulates the very fabric of space-time around the craft. A conventional rocket works by throwing mass backward to propel itself forward, fighting against gravity and atmosphere. This system was fundamentally different. By generating an intense, controlled gravity wave, essentially creating its own localized gravitational field, the craft could effectively pull itself toward a destination or push space away from it. It would manipulate the coordinate system of space-time itself, reducing or nullifying inertia and mass around it. To an outside observer, it wouldn't fly, It would simply translate, moving from one point to another with impossible agility, making right-angle turns at tremendous speed without crushing whatever was inside. This is where conventional physics, the physics Bob had built his career upon, broke down completely. Our understanding of gravity, codified by Einstein, sees it as a curvature of space-time caused by mass. We cannot create gravity. We only experience the effect of existing mass. The idea of a reactor generating a controllable gravity, a field, was akin to saying you could produce and shape magnetism without any electric charge or moving electrons. It was a fundamental rewrite of the rules. Furthermore, the system seemed to require no traditional fuel. The 115 isotope was described as stable, its reaction not a violent fission or fusion chain, but a more subtle, direct conversion of matter into gravitational energy. Where was the waste heat? How was the field contained and shaped with such precision? The engineering solutions to these problems were as opaque as the hull of the craft itself. Bob's mind, trained in particle physics and propulsion, wrestled with this daily. He could grasp the theoretical framework they sketched for him, but the implementation was a black box of unknowable technology. He saw waveguides and amplifiers made of materials whose atomic structure was a mystery. He worked on a lab bench trying to understand the craft's reactor support systems, but it was like a medieval blacksmith being handed a semiconductor and told to fix a smartphone. The logic, the foundational science, was missing. His attempts to understand felt like trying to decipher a symphony by only studying the violin's varnish. Yet the most unsettling part wasn't the technology. It was where it came from, and the chilling historical context he discovered in the facility's briefing documents. As part of his indoctrination and to provide necessary context, Bob was given access to a limited set of classified briefing documents. These were not loose-leaf papers, but bound in simple, dark-colored covers with alphanumeric codes stamped on the front. They contained no sensational photographs or wild speculation. Their tone was dry, bureaucratic, and for that reason, profoundly more convincing than any fantastical tale. They read like classified annexes to a history book that had never been published. The documents outlined, in stark clinical language, a narrative of non-human presence and intervention spanning millennia. They referenced archaeological anomalies that had been systematically recovered or suppressed. There were mentions of specific digs in Mesopotamia, Central America, and the Middle East where artifacts of non-terrestrial manufacture, or technologically anomalous character, had been unearthed by conventional archaeologists, only to be quietly confiscated by unnamed federal assets, citing national security. The documents treated these events not as discoveries, but as containment operations. The historical timeline presented was staggering. It suggested that what we call visitation was not a modern phenomenon beginning in 1947 with Roswell, but a sporadic, perhaps continuous, interaction woven throughout human development. The documents implied that certain leaps in human technology, certain unexplained monuments, and even strands of our mythologies might be distorted echoes of this contact. The gods descending from the heavens in ancient epics, the Vimanas described in Sanskrit texts, the mysterious knowledge of lost civilizations. These were reframed not as fiction or coincidence, but as the fragmented, misunderstood human record of a reality it could not process. For Bob, a man of science, this was a shock of a different magnitude than the spacecraft itself. The craft was a physical object, a problem of engineering and physics. These documents presented a problem of history, anthropology, and the very nature of human identity. The realization was cold and immense. We are not alone, and the profound, lonely narrative of humanity as the sole intelligent occupants of a silent universe was a fiction. We had never been alone. Our entire history, our religions, our sense of cosmic isolation had unfolded under the silent, observational gaze of something else. The documents suggested a relationship that was neither openly benevolent nor overtly hostile, but observational and proprietary, like a farmer checking on a field, with occasional, targeted interventions to steer the crop. This knowledge created a dizzying perspective shift. Gazing up at the night sky now held a terrifying duality. It was still a realm of beauty and wonder, but it was also a landscape that was, in some sense, occupied. The stars were not just distant suns. They were potential waypoints in a mapped and traveled cosmos from which visitors had come, not as strangers arriving, but as periodic residents returning. It recast human history as a story with hidden authors, our civilization a project with unseen supervisors. But reading about it was one thing. Seeing the proof was another, and it awaited him in a separate, even more secure part of the S4 complex, a place referred to only as the biological archive. The true heart of the craft's impossible capabilities lay in its power source, a system so advanced it seemed to operate on principles that bordered on alchemy. The reactor was a deceptively compact device, roughly the size of a small washing machine, integrated seamlessly into the lower central structure of the craft. It was designed not for fission or fusion, the brute force methods of human nuclear physics, but for something far more elegant and potent, matter-antimatter annihilation, mediated by the unique properties of element 115. The theoretical process, as sketched for him, was staggering in its efficiency and simplicity. Within the reactor, a small piece of the 115 isotope was bombarded with protons in a targeted manner. This collision did not cause a chaotic explosion, but rather triggered a precise transmutation. The 115 would shed a single proton, decaying into an isotope of element 116. This decay process, incredibly, released antimatter particles, specifically antineutrons and antiprotons. These were then magnetically funneled to a reaction chamber where they met their normal matter counterparts. The complete matter-antimatter annihilation that followed was the most energy-dense reaction known to physics, converting nearly 100% of the mass involved into pure energy, with no radioactive byproducts. The 115 acted not as fuel, but as a stable, long-lived catalyst for generating antimatter on demand. The energy output this allowed was incomprehensible by terrestrial standards. A single, peach pit-sized wedge of the material, weighing about 500 grams, could theoretically power the entire reactor system for decades, if not centuries, given the minuscule amounts of antimatter needed for each reaction cycle. This explained the craft's apparent lack of bulky fuel tanks or massive cooling systems. The energy was generated exactly where and when it was needed, in precisely the amount required, with near-total efficiency. It was power generation reduced to its most fundamental, almost philosophical essence, the direct conversion of matter into usable force. What was most disconcerting, however, was the apparent lack of conventional safety mechanisms. In a human-designed antimatter reactor, the containment fields would be the focus of immense, redundant engineering, with multiple fail-safes to prevent a catastrophic breach. A single gram of antimatter annihilating with matter would yield an explosion rivaling a small nuclear bomb. The alien system displayed no such visible redundancy. The containment fields were generated by the reactor itself, seemingly woven into the very process. It was as if the technology had transcended the concept of mechanical failure, operating on a level of integration where safety wasn't an added feature, but an inherent property of the system's stable-state physics. This approach to power generation revealed a technological philosophy fundamentally different from our own. Human energy solutions are almost universally additive and extractive. We burn things, we split atoms, we dam rivers, we capture sunlight. All methods that involve taking from an external source and converting it, often messily. This system was introspective and self-contained. It created the conditions for its own perfect reaction from a stable piece of refined matter, controlling forces we consider uncontrollable with an elegance that seemed less like engineering and more like a form of applied, high-energy metaphysics. This power source could change humanity forever, if anyone believed it existed. It promised an end to energy scarcity, to pollution, to geopolitical conflicts over resources. Yet, here it was, sitting in an underground bunker in the desert, a secret too potent to ever see the light of day. For all the cosmic grandeur of his subject matter, Bob's day-to-day duties were grounded in the mundane rituals of scientific labor. He was not at the controls of the craft, nor was he piecing together its grand theory. His assigned role was technical and specific, to work on the craft's gravitational reactors, amplifier, or focusing system. He was given schematics, not the original alien designs, but rough, human-drawn interpretations based on years of prior study, and tasked with understanding how to test and potentially back-engineer a single subsystem. His workstation was a standard-issue, government-issue metal desk in a clean but otherwise ordinary lab room, littered with oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, voltmeters, and his own notes. The surreal contrast became the new normal. He would spend his morning calibrating a piece of standard test equipment, checking connections, and grounding wires, the same tedious prep work done in any electronics lab on Earth. Then, he would be led to a bench where a component from the craft, a smooth, featureless ovoid of the same strange material, connected to human-made cables via improvised adapters, was mounted. His task was to run diagnostic pulses through it and interpret the baffling readouts. It was a bizarre fusion of the utterly ordinary and the completely alien, a Hewlett-Packard oscilloscope trying to make sense of a gravity lens. Interactions with the handful of other scientists in his section were conducted in a hushed, professional shorthand, laced with unspoken understanding. Conversations never strayed into the philosophical or the sensational. They spoke in code names and technical parameters. The actuator for the A-field emitter is showing a phase variance, one might say. Check the waveform generator's modulation, another would reply. It was all shop talk, a deliberate focus on the minute technical puzzle directly in front of them. This professional detachment was a survival mechanism, a way to process the impossible by reducing it to a series of solvable, if profoundly strange, engineering problems. They were like mechanics working on a Formula One car from another galaxy, discussing torque intolerances while avoiding the obvious question of who built the engine and why. The environment itself added to the dissonance. The lab had fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, coffee stains on the counter, and the faint smell of ozone and solder. He would take his lunch in a small, drab cafeteria with other base personnel, some of whom likely worked on entirely conventional black projects. The surrealism was internalized. He lived a double life where the most revolutionary discovery in human history was just another day at the office, its paperwork filed under a cryptic security classification. The sheer, grinding normalcy of the process, the meetings, the reports, the equipment malfunctions, acted as a bizarre anchor, tethering this universe-shattering secret to the boring rhythms of a 9-to-5 job. Yet every day, that hand scanner reminded him this was real. That cool, humming touch, that silent acknowledgement of his biological signature to open a door, was the tactile proof that severed him from the mundane world outside and anchored him firmly in the impossible reality within. As the weeks turned into months, Bob's sharp, analytical mind began to detect unsettling patterns beneath the surface of his assigned work. The first was the stark compartmentalization. He and his team were working on isolated subsystems, the amplifier, the reactor controls, the gravitational emitter, but they were never shown how these pieces interacted as a whole. The big picture schematic, if it existed, was withheld. It felt less like a collaborative research effort and more like an assembly line where each worker only knows how to attach one specific part, never seeing the final product. This prevented any single person from understanding the complete system, a classic intelligence method for protecting secrets. The questions he and others naturally raised were met with a uniform response. That's not your purview. Or, the analysis is ongoing at another facility. Inquiries about the craft's origin, specific planetary data, biological information about its creators, the nature of their society or intent, were swiftly shut down. The focus was relentlessly, narrowly technological. How it worked, not who made it or why it was here. Historical data from the briefing documents was never referenced again. It was as if that knowledge had been provided once as a shock absorber, then sealed away. Information flowed in one direction only, downward, in specific, limited packets. He also noticed curious gaps in the facility's own knowledge base. While they possessed the craft and some components, they seemed to lack fundamental understanding. There were no service manuals, no theoretical physics papers derived from the technology, no clear chain of scientific deduction leading from discovery to current research. The human-drawn schematics he worked from were crude, filled with question marks and best guesses. It suggested the program was not one of masterful reverse engineering, but of desperate, stumbling archaeology. They were trying to decipher a language without an alphabet, using tools that were fundamentally incompatible. Most telling was the behavior of the military and administrative overseers. Their attitude wasn't that of excited pioneers on the frontier of science. It was one of containment and control. Security was paramount. Progress was slow and cautious to the point of stagnation, and any independent line of questioning was viewed with suspicion. The overriding goal did not feel like understand this to advance humanity. It felt like understand this enough to control it and prevent anyone else from ever knowing. A growing, cold suspicion took root in his mind. The secret wasn't being kept from the public for their own good, or even for national security in a traditional sense. It was being kept to maintain a monopoly on power, a power so absolute it would render all current geopolitics obsolete. The initial awe began to curdle into a deep unease. The pieces didn't fit. The extreme secrecy, the fragmented research, the suppressed history, the control-oriented management. It painted a picture of a program that was less about discovery and more about ownership. He was no longer just a scientist working on a fascinating puzzle. He was a resource, a brain with specific skills, being used to decode a technology his employers feared as much as they coveted. And then, Bob started to wonder, why was he really there? Was he meant to help unlock the stars? Or was he simply another cog in a machine designed to keep the cosmos under lock and key? The hand scanner at S4 represented a quantum leap in biometric verification, one that rendered even the most advanced human systems primitive by comparison. Earth-based security, at its pinnacle, relies on reading surface features or specific biological markers, of fingerprints, whorls, and ridges, the unique pattern of blood vessels in a retina, the shape of a face. These are two-dimensional maps, sophisticated but essentially superficial. The alien device operated on an entirely different, and far more profound, principle. It didn't just read the hand. It seemed to resonate with the entire living structure placed upon it. The sensation users described, that deep, subaudible hum traveling up the arm, was the key. The scanner appeared to emit a complex, low-frequency energy field, likely a combination of specific electromagnetic frequencies and gravitational waves. As this field interacted with the hand, it didn't merely reflect off the skin. It penetrated and interacted with the multiple layers of tissue beneath. It mapped the three-dimensional topography of the fingerprint in exquisite detail, but it also read the unique electrical conductivity of the skin, the precise density and distribution of blood vessels and capillaries, the subtle moisture content, and even the faint bioelectric field generated by the body's nervous system. The depth of information gathered was what made it truly unhackable. A human security system can be fooled by a high-resolution photograph, a latex fingerprint mold, or a sophisticated digital spoof. This scanner created a holistic biological snapshot. It would detect the absence of a living pulse, the wrong thermal signature, or even a microscopic variation in tissue density that would betray a replica. It wasn't just identifying a pattern. It was confirming a living, specific biological entity in its complete, momentary state. The verification was a process of harmonic recognition, as if the device was humming a specific tune and only the correct biological structure would hum back in perfect, complex resonance. Compared to the blinking lights, beeps, and flashing lasers of human biometric terminals, the alien scanner was unnervingly quiet and passive. There was no feedback, no access granted message. The door simply opened when the complex biological equation was satisfied. This lack of theatricality spoke of a technology so confident in its own function that it required no confirmation for the user. The eerie accuracy was absolute. In all his time there, Bob never saw it malfunction, never saw it require calibration or maintenance, and never heard of it admitting the wrong person. It was a piece of security infrastructure that performed its singular function with the silent, infallible perfection of a natural law. This perfection was the most telling clue. Such a device wasn't the product of iterative engineering, of trial and error leading to gradual improvement. It felt like a mature, finalized technology, a solved problem. Its design embodied a total understanding of biological systems at a quantum mechanical level, and an ability to manipulate subtle energy fields with such finesse that they could perform a deeply invasive scan that was also completely harmless. It was engineering elegance raised to an art form. But the most disturbing part was what it revealed about who built it, a truth that became apparent not in its software, but in its very hardware, in the shape of the plate his hand rested upon. The unsettling revelation came not from a briefing, but from simple, everyday use. As Bob placed his hand on the cool, curved plate day after day, a subtle sense of physical mismatch grew. The scanner's active surface was contoured, but the curve wasn't quite right for a human palm. When he laid his hand flat, his fingers splayed slightly wider than the area of optimal contact. The heel of his palm didn't sit fully in the shallow depression meant to cradle it. It was like using a tool handle carved for a larger, differently proportioned hand. Functional, but constantly reminding you it wasn't made for you. By observing the wear patterns on the improvised guide markers the human technicians had added, small, adhesive dots indicating where to place the fingertips, the intended user's anatomy could be inferred. The scanner was designed for a hand with a broader palm relative to its length, with fingers that were likely longer and possibly thicker at the base, tapering differently. The spacing between the finger positions suggested a hand where the digits were set further apart. Most notably, the guide for the heel of the hand was positioned for a being with a longer, more pronounced metacarpal structure, essentially, a longer palm before the wrist began. It was not a monstrous or wildly alien shape, but a distinctly non-human one, an anatomy of a terrestrial, humanoid, yet decidedly other physiology. The adaptations for human use were crude by comparison to the scanner's own technology. Those small adhesive dots, and later a thin, laser-cut plastic overlay with hand outlines, were kludges, inelegant patches on a perfect system. They were necessary because the scanner's core programming was locked. It couldn't be reprogrammed for a new user profile. It could only be taught to accept specific new biological signatures within its existing parameters. Humans weren't administrators of this system. They were being granted guest access by a higher authority, their unique signatures added to a whitelist that operated within the device's original, unchanging understanding of acceptable hand morphology. This simple ergonomic mismatch carried profound implications. It was concrete, physical proof that the technology was not merely found, but was created by and for a specific biological species. The builders weren't amorphous energy beings or floating intelligences. They were physical entities who used their hands to manipulate their environment, who built doors and security systems, and whose hands looked like this. The crafts, the reactors, the scanners, all of it was user-friendly for them. It shattered any last vestige of the idea that this might be some ambiguous, ancient, or abandoned technology. It was current, it was purpose-built, and its original users had a form that was almost, but not quite, like our own. Bob's realization was chilling in its clarity. Humanity wasn't reverse engineering mysterious artifacts from a long-dead civilization. They were essentially breaking into and trying to hotwire someone else's parked car, a car whose very door handle was shaped for the owner's hand. Every time he used the scanner, he was performing a small act of biological impersonation, his human hand awkwardly mimicking the posture of another species to gain entry to their property. This wasn't adapted from human technology. Humans were adapting to theirs, a guest fumbling with a host's custom-made lock. The scanner's true technological horror, or marvel, lay in the specificity of what it was analyzing. Through discussions with colleagues and his own deductions from the scanner's resonant hum, Bob came to understand it wasn't just scanning soft tissue. Its penetrating energy field was tuned to interact with the skeletal structure. It was performing a real-time, ultra-precise analysis of bone density, trabecular bone architecture, the microscopic latticework inside bones, and even the mineral composition of the skeletal matrix. Your fingerprint could be copied. Your retinal pattern could be photographed. But the exact, living density of the bones in your hand, a product of your genetics, diet, age, and medical history, was a volumetric signature nearly impossible to spoof. The precision suggested was staggering. Human medical technology can measure bone density, but it requires large, stationary machines like DEXA scanners, and the process takes time, delivering a broad average for a section of bone. This device appeared to map the density milligram by milligram, voxel by voxel, in a fraction of a second, creating a dynamic, three-dimensional mineral map of the entire hand's skeletal structure. It could likely detect recent fractures, signs of osteoporosis, or even specific isotopic signatures in the bone that would reveal diet and geography. It was a medical diagnostic tool masquerading as a security lock. The medical implications of such a technology, if it could be understood and replicated, were revolutionary. Imagine a device that could detect the earliest stages of bone cancer, osteoporosis, or metabolic bone diseases with a simple touch, instantly, and without radiation. It could monitor healing, assess nutritional status, or even identify individuals through skeletal remains with absolute certainty where fingerprints and DNA were degraded. It represented a non-invasive window into the body's deepest structural integrity, a fusion of security and advanced medicine that humanity had never conceived. This dual purpose begged a critical question. Why would a security system need this level of biological detail? For a high-security human facility, verifying identity is enough. But for the original builders, identity and health status might have been intertwined. The scanner could have been designed to ensure that only individuals in specific physiological condition were granted access, perhaps to areas with environmental hazards, or to control systems that required a certain physical stability to operate. It might have been a way to monitor the crew's health automatically each time they entered a sensitive area. Or, more darkly, it could have been a form of species-specific and health-specific segregation, ensuring that only the correct type of being in the correct state of health could proceed. The technology spoke of a society where biology and security were seamlessly integrated, where your very physical state was part of your access credential. The scanner, therefore, was more than a lock. It was a sophisticated biosensor. It didn't just ask, "Are you Bob Lazar?" It asked, "Are you the correct species with the correct biological signature?" And is your structural integrity within acceptable parameters? It was a gatekeeper that understood its users at a fundamental, cellular level. But security wasn't the only thing this device was designed for. This deep biological insight pointed toward a broader, more unsettling possibility about the nature of the entire program at S4, a possibility that would soon lead Bob to take a risk that would change everything. Beyond the physical mapping of tissue and bone, the hand scanner seemed to interact with something even more elusive, the body's intrinsic energy field. As Bob grew more accustomed to its subtle hum, he began to suspect it wasn't just interrogating biological matter, but the complex electromagnetic and possibly subtler energies that living systems generate. The human body produces a symphony of electrical activity, the firing of neurons, the beating of the heart, the minute currents flowing across cell membranes. This bioelectric field is unique, dynamic, and intimately tied to one's state of health, consciousness, and even momentary stress. The scanner's resonant pulse felt tuned to harmonize with, or perhaps momentarily capture, this unique energetic fingerprint. This suggested hints of a technology that blurred the line between the physical and the metaphysical. If the device could read and verify something as subtle and personalized as a bioelectric aura, it implied the builders operated on a scientific model where consciousness, biology, and energy were not separate domains, but integrated aspects of a unified whole. Their engineering appeared to acknowledge what some human philosophies and holistic practices have long suggested, that life is more than its chemical and structural components. It is also a pattern of coherent energy. For them, this wasn't mysticism. It was measurable, quantifiable physics, and they had the tools to measure it. The connection between biology and energy in this device was seamless. It didn't treat the body as a machine to be identified by its parts, but as a complete, living energy system. The security check, therefore, wasn't just about matching a static blueprint. It was a momentary confirmation that the correct energy pattern, the specific, living vibration of an individual, was present at the door. This explained why it was so foolproof. You could replicate a hand's physical dimensions, even its surface fingerprints and thermal signature, but replicating the exact, dynamic bioenergetic field of a specific person at a specific moment was an order of magnitude more complex, if not impossible, with human technology. Bob, the physicist, struggled deeply with this. His training was in particles, in measurable forces, in waveforms that could be graphed on an oscilloscope. The concept of a life force, or a conscious energy field, was the realm of philosophy, not his brand of hard science. Yet, the empirical evidence of the scanner pushed him toward this uncomfortable frontier. He couldn't categorize what he was experiencing within his existing framework. The device worked with infallible precision, and the only explanation that fit all its observed abilities was that it was accessing a layer of reality, a layer where biological life and a fundamental energy field were entwined, that human science had not yet learned to perceive, let alone engineer. It forced a humbling admission. There were entire chapters in the book of physics that his species hadn't even discovered. This realization was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. The scanner was a key, but it was a key that operated in a lock built from a science humanity didn't possess. Every successful use was a small demonstration of our ignorance. The cool plate under his palm was a bridge to a reality where thought, energy, and matter were more intimately connected than he had ever dared imagine. It was as if the device could read not just your body, but your very essence, the unique song of energy that made you you. And if it could read it, what else could it do? Could it influence it? Could it, in some way he couldn't grasp, communicate with it? These were questions that veered from the technological into the profoundly personal, and they marked the boundary where his scientific curiosity began to morph into a deeper, more primal unease. The central, maddening challenge of the entire S UFO program wasn't just understanding the individual pieces of alien technology, but the integration problem. Each component, the hand scanner, the reactor, the gravity emitters, was a masterpiece of unknown engineering. But the true genius and the true barrier lay in how these components were woven together. They weren't connected by wires or conventional circuits as humans understand them. They seemed to communicate and transfer power through methods that were invisible, likely using modulated gravity waves or entangled quantum states. Trying to reverse engineer them with human tools was like trying to reverse engineer the internet using only a telegraph key and a length of copper wire. Conventional scientific approaches failed spectacularly. Standard diagnostic tools gave nonsense readings or no readings at all. Attempting to supply power to a component from a human source was futile. The energy types were incompatible, like trying to power a light bulb with steam. Even the materials science was a dead end. The substances used were not just alloys or composites. Their atomic structure appeared manipulated, ordered, in a way that gave them properties no naturally occurring or human-synthesized material possessed. They were less like engineered metals and more like frozen energy states with material properties. The foundational logic of the design was alien, operating on principles that bypassed or unified branches of physics that human science considered separate: electromagnetism, gravity, and the strong nuclear force. This alien logic was the greatest hurdle. Human technology is largely additive and modular. We build components that perform specific functions and then link them together. The alien technology appeared subtractive and holistic. A single component, like the hand scanner, performed multiple, deeply integrated functions: security, biometrics, health scanning, energy field analysis. Not because it contained separate subcircuits for each, but because its very construction and operating principle inherently produced all those results simultaneously. Its function was an emergent property of its form and the energy matrix it existed within. You couldn't isolate the bone density circuit from the biofield reader because, in their science, those were not separate circuits. They were different expressions of the same underlying interaction. Bob's initial frustration as an engineer, tasked with making sense of a system that defied sense, gradually transformed into a deep, reluctant respect for the builders. This wasn't just advanced technology. It was technology from a civilization that had mastered the fundamental language of the universe in a way humanity had not. Their creations were not just machines. They were physical theorems, demonstrations of a complete and elegant scientific understanding. The respect was tinged with humility. He and his colleagues weren't brilliant scientists unlocking secrets. They were clever primates poking at a supercomputer with sticks, occasionally getting a light to blink, but having no conception of the operating system. The integration problem ultimately pointed to a chilling, unspoken truth about the program. They could use some of the technology, turn on the hand scanner, activate basic systems on the craft under controlled conditions, because they had been shown how, like a child being shown which button to press. But they didn't understand why it worked. The user manual was a series of rote procedures passed down, possibly from those who had first recovered the craft. And every failure to integrate, every dead-end experiment, every component that sat inert on a bench despite their best efforts, brought one question closer to the surface: who taught us to use it? And what happened to them? A gradual, chilling awareness began to dawn on Bob. His comprehension of the hand scanner, not just as a tool, but as a revelation of an entirely different scientific paradigm, set him apart. Many of his colleagues focused on their narrow technical tasks, avoiding the larger implications. The military minders saw it as a security device, period. But Bob, with his background in physics and his hands-on, inquisitive nature, had pieced together a more complete picture. He understood that the scanner was a Rosetta Stone, not for language, but for a science that unified biology, energy, and matter. This unique knowledge, This depth of understanding about a single piece of technology became a dangerous possession. The isolation was no longer just about secrecy. It was intellectual and existential. He realized he was thinking about the problem in a way few others in the program likely were. He lay awake at night, not just wondering about reactor mechanics, but about what a civilization that built such devices would value, how they would think, what their relationship to reality would be. This profound line of thinking had no outlet. To voice these thoughts would mark him as unstable, a philosopher, in a world that valued narrow technicians. He was alone with the magnitude of his own deductions, trapped in a vault of his own making within the larger vault of S4. With this understanding came the first cold whispers of danger. He began to notice subtle shifts. A more intense interest in his background checks from a new security officer. Questions during debriefings that probed not just what he did, but what he thought about the technology. The occasional feeling, perhaps paranoid but felt nonetheless, that his movements in less secure areas of the base were being observed. The hand scanner, the very source of his insight, became a symbol of his vulnerability. Every time he used it, he was logging his presence, proving he had accessed a realm of forbidden knowledge. It was no longer just a door lock. It was a digital breadcrumb, a record that he, Bob Lazar, had been here, had touched this, and therefore knew. The device transformed in his perception from a wonder of engineering into a potential snare. Its perfection was now menacing. It never forgot, never made a mistake. If someone wanted to know who had accessed the inner sanctums, who had been exposed to the core truths of the program, the scanner's immutable logic would provide the list. And his name was on it. His knowledge of its true capabilities meant he understood the kind of minds that could create it, minds that would consider such detailed biological and energetic mapping trivial. If those minds were out there, they were formidable beyond comprehension. And if the human guardians of this secret were in any way aligned with or mimicking that mindset, then control and containment would be their absolute priority. A line had been crossed. He was no longer merely an employee with a security clearance. He was a custodian of a catalytic truth. The hand scanner was the proof, tangible, daily, operational proof, that everything else he was working on was real. It was the one piece of the puzzle he could describe with absolute confidence because he had interacted with it personally, repeatedly. It was his anchor to reality when the rest seemed like a dream. But that anchor was also a chain. Because knowing the truth about the hand scanner meant becoming a target, not necessarily from the stars, but from the very earthbound institution that had sworn him to silence, an institution that might now view his depth of understanding not as an asset, but as the program's single greatest point of failure. It began not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, personal discrepancy that gnawed at the edges of his routine. For Bob, life had settled into a surreal rhythm. The drive into the desert, the security gauntlet, the work on the impossible, the drive home. He kept meticulous notes, both for his work and out of personal habit. Reviewing his log one evening, he noticed an oddity. His entry for the previous Wednesday was sparse, almost cursory, unlike his usual detailed technical notations. More strangely, he had no substantive memory of the day itself. He recalled arriving at S4 and going through the security checkpoints, but the hours between morning arrival and evening departure were a vague, gray blur, devoid of specific events, conversations, or tasks. This wasn't mere forgetfulness. He tried to reconstruct the day, focusing on lunch. Did he eat in the cafeteria? He couldn't picture it. Who did he speak with about the waveform modulator? The names and faces wouldn't come. It was as if a section of his mental tape had been cleanly spliced out, leaving only the blank leader. The harder he tried to focus on that empty space, the more a dull, diffuse headache would bloom behind his eyes, a psychic resistance to the inquiry itself. The absence had a quality, a distinct feeling of something removed, rather than simply something forgotten. Cautiously, in the most oblique terms possible, He probed his immediate colleagues. "That test on Wednesday was a real bear, wasn't it?" he'd venture. The responses were telling. Some would nod vaguely, offering non-committal grunts. Others would look momentarily confused, their eyes glazing over as they tried to access the memory, before shrugging and changing the subject. One, a fellow engineer named Barry, reacted more strongly. When Bob mentioned the missing day, Barry's face went pale. "Don't," he said quietly, cutting him off with a sharp gesture. "Just don't think about it. It's not worth it." The fear in Barry's eyes was more revealing than any confirmation. Theories about what happened during those missing hours circulated in hushed, paranoid whispers among those brave enough to acknowledge the phenomenon. Some speculated about advanced debriefing or psychological conditioning sessions conducted under amnesiac drugs, a way to reinforce compliance or erase accidental exposures. Others wondered if they were subjected to medical tests, perhaps monitoring their physiological reactions to prolonged exposure to the craft's anomalous energy fields. The most unsettling theory, whispered only once and never repeated, suggested the phenomenon wasn't induced by their handlers at all, but was a side effect of the technology itself. That perhaps, in proximity to the gravity drives or other systems, localized space-time anomalies could occur, creating pockets of lost time for those within them, a literal bending of their personal timelines. The official response to any inquiry was a bland, bureaucratic wall. "Your schedule was within project parameters," a supervisor would state. "All activities are logged appropriately." But the logs, when requested, were generic, filled with approved project codes that revealed nothing. The message was clear: your memory is not a reliable record. The official record is the only truth. This gaslighting, this deliberate severing of a man from his own lived experience, was a deeper violation than any security oath. It attacked the very core of personal autonomy. The missing Wednesday stood as a personal monument to the program's absolute control. It proved they could reach into his mind and edit his reality, leaving only a phantom limb of time where a memory should be. But missing time was just the beginning of what they were hiding. The next phase of their containment strategy wasn't about altering his past. It was about dominating his present, ensuring his future remained silent. After the incident of the missing time, Bob's world outside the facility began to feel different. The paranoia was no longer an abstract concept. It became a tangible presence, a second shadow. He first noticed it during the long, lonely drive home from the desert. A particular vehicle, a nondescript sedan, seemed to appear in his rearview mirror at the same desolate junction on 2 consecutive evenings. It maintained a constant, almost mathematically precise distance, never too close to be obvious, never far enough to lose sight. When he took an unexpected turn onto a rough service road, the sedan continued straight, but 10 minutes later, as he merged back onto the main highway, a different vehicle, a dark pickup truck, assumed the same position in his mirror. The surveillance extended to his home life. From his living room window, he would notice a car parked a little too far down the quiet street, its interior dark. Sometimes, after nightfall, he'd see the faint glow of a cigarette ember behind the windshield, a tiny red eye in the darkness. No one ever approached the house. No one knocked. The presence was purely observational, a performance designed to be noticed. It was psychological theater, a way to say, "We are here. We are always here. You are never not being seen." The normality of his neighborhood, children playing, neighbors mowing lawns, now existed in a jarring counterpoint to the silent watch posted at its edges. The intrusions became more direct. Phone calls at odd hours would connect with a silent line, the dead air on the other end feeling heavy and listening. On 2 occasions, his home phone produced a series of sharp, electronic pulses upon pickup, not a dial tone, not a ring, but a staccato digital screech that lasted 3 seconds before the line went dead. These weren't malfunctions, they were diagnostics, or perhaps a form of harassment, a technological tap on the shoulder. Even mundane activities felt staged. A trip to the grocery store would be punctuated by the same man in a baseball cap appearing in two different aisles, never making eye contact, never buying anything. The feeling of being constantly observed rewired his nervous system. He found himself editing his behavior in his own home, pausing before speaking, glancing at the corners of rooms as if looking for lenses. Laughter with friends became strained, the joy tempered by the subconscious knowledge that it was being witnessed, analyzed for cracks in his facade. The watchers weren't there to catch him in the act of espionage. They were there to enforce a state of mind. Their goal was to make the weight of the secret physically crushing, to transform his life into a panopticon where he was both the prisoner and his own warden. The isolation of the desert facility now bled into his personal life, creating a seamless continuum of scrutiny. This constant observation served a dual purpose. It was a warning, yes, but also a test. They were applying pressure, monitoring for the leak they feared was inevitable. Every casual conversation he had, every public outing, was a data point for their analysis. They were watching to see if he'd talk, but to whom? To a friend? A journalist? Would he crack under the pressure of living a double life under a microscope? The watchers were a human algorithm calculating his breaking point, and their silent, relentless presence was the most powerful argument yet for permanent, terrified silence. Yet, it also confirmed the immense value of what he knew. They wouldn't bother with such an elaborate, psychological siege if his story was considered a harmless fiction. The psychological pressure of the watchers made the phone call, when it finally came, almost a relief. It was a direct communication, a line drawn in the sand. He was home alone, the evening quiet broken by the shrill ring. He picked up, and a voice, digitally altered, flattened into a robotic monotone by a voice scrambler, spoke without greeting. "You have a family," the voice stated. It wasn't a question. It was a cold inventory. A wife. They enjoy their lives. They enjoy their safety. The words were delivered with a slow, deliberate cadence, allowing each one to land with the weight of a stone. There was no anger in the tone, only a chilling, administrative certainty. The desert is a dangerous place. Accidents happen. Houses have fires. Cars fail. Bob's blood turned to ice. He said nothing, his grip tightening on the receiver until his knuckles were white. The voice continued, outlining consequences not for him, but for the people he loved, in a language of plausible deniability. It would be a tragedy, such a waste, all for stories, wild stories no one would believe anyway. The message was meticulously crafted. Your secret is not valuable to the world, but acting on it is lethally dangerous to your family. The threat was clear, professional, and utterly convincing. It bypassed his own courage and targeted his most fundamental human instincts. Protect your tribe. After the line went dead, the silence in the house was deafening, more threatening than the distorted voice. He sat in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounding like the hum of the hand scanner, a resonant tie to the world that now threatened him. The internal struggle that erupted was visceral. On one side was primal fear, a clear, cinematic vision of harm coming to innocent people because of his choices. The voice had weaponized his conscience against itself. How could any truth be worth that risk? The program's genius was in this maneuver. They weren't threatening to kill him for talking. They were threatening to make him responsible for the deaths of others if he did. It was a moral trap. Yet, on the other side of that fear, his conscience writhed with a different kind of pain. The truth he carried wasn't just a story. It was a fundamental fact about reality, about humanity's place in the cosmos, about a technology that could end suffering. To bury it forever out of personal fear felt like a profound betrayal of scientific truth, of the public's right to know, of the very future of his species. Was he to be the gatekeeper who forever locked the door to the stars because he was afraid? The weight of the secret transformed from a burden into a ticking clock. His silence wasn't neutral. It was an active choice to side with the cover-up. The warning clarified everything. It proved the secret was real enough to kill for. It proved the program's morality was purely operational, where human lives were variables in a cost-benefit analysis. And most importantly, it proved he was right. They wouldn't send a ghostly voice to threaten a man's family over a lie or a minor security breach. The extremity of the response validated the extremity of his knowledge. They had shown him their bottom line. Now he had to find his. The fear was a cage, but within it, a resolve began to harden, cold and sharp. They had made a tactical error. By making the threat so personal, so vile, they had eliminated any moral ambiguity about his role. But silence had a price he wasn't willing to pay. A price measured in the permanent captivity of human potential. The question was no longer if he would act, but how. The anonymous threat did not silence Bob Lazar. It catalyzed him. It stripped away the last vestiges of professional obligation and revealed the choice in its starkest terms. The moral weight of the secret was no longer an abstract philosophical problem. It was now a direct equation. His family's safety versus humanity's right to a paradigm-shattering truth. To choose silence was to actively participate in the perpetuation of a lie of cosmic proportions. He realized that the secrecy wasn't about protecting national security from foreign adversaries. It was about a small group of people maintaining a monopoly on a future-altering power. Keeping silent meant condemning humanity to a slower, dirtier, more conflict-ridden path while the key to a new age sat in a desert bunker. His belief solidified into a conviction. Humanity deserved to know. This wasn't about personal glory or vindication. It was about the principle that knowledge of this magnitude, knowledge about non-human intelligence, about physics-defying technology, about our own history, could not ethically be owned by a classified program. The public, the global scientific community, every person looking up at the stars with wonder, had a right to know they were not alone and that the laws of the universe held possibilities they had never dreamed of. To withhold this was a form of intellectual tyranny. The potential benefits, unified physics, clean energy, medical advances hinted at by the scanner's capabilities, were too great to be buried in the name of control. He prepared for the consequences with a clear, if grim, understanding. He knew his career was over. He knew his reputation would be savaged, his past scrutinized and manipulated to paint him as a fraud. He knew the legal repercussions under the Espionage Act could mean imprisonment. The chilling voice on the phone had made the personal dangers terrifyingly clear. He took what precautions he could, having difficult conversations with loved ones, securing personal documents, and steeling himself for a life of controversy and disbelief. He accepted that he would be called a liar, a con man, a lunatic, but he also clung to a physicist's faith in evidence. He possessed specific, technical details, names, locations, processes, physical descriptions that a fabricator could not invent. A fragile hope emerged from this resolve, that the truth itself would become a form of protection. He reasoned that if he remained a quiet, solitary scientist sitting on the secret, he was a vulnerable, disposable asset. But if he placed the story into the public domain, if he became the public face of this incredible narrative, he would be harder to silence. Discrediting him would be one thing. Making him disappear after he had spoken to a credible journalist would be an undeniable confirmation of his claims. The light of public attention, however glaring and hostile, was preferable to the silent darkness where accidents happen and houses have fires. By speaking, he was trading the covert threat for an overt battle, a battle he believed he could win with facts. He would force the secret into the open and let humanity judge its validity. So he reached out to the one person who might listen, a journalist with a reputation for tackling the taboo with a seriousness others lacked. George Knapp of Class TV in Las Vegas. George Knapp was not a typical UFO reporter chasing lights in the sky. He was a seasoned, award-winning investigative journalist for a major Las Vegas television station, known for hard-nosed reporting on politics and corruption. His interest in the UFO subject was rooted in a journalist's skepticism and a Nevada resident's awareness of the strange lore surrounding the vast, restricted deserts in his own backyard. When Bob Lazar's cautious, initial contact filtered through to Knapp, he approached it not with credulous excitement, but with a detective's wariness. Here was a man claiming unprecedented access to the most secret place on Earth, right next door. It was either the story of the millennium or an elaborate hoax, and Knapp's reputation hinged on determining which. The approach was careful, methodical. Knapp did not rush to air. He began with long, probing conversations, testing Bob's knowledge, looking for inconsistencies, gauging his demeanor. He was struck not by wild-eyed fanaticism, but by Bob's matter-of-fact, often frustrated, technical explanations. Bob spoke the language of an engineer, not a prophet. Knapp then initiated a rigorous verification process. He discreetly checked the bones of Bob's story. He confirmed Bob's employment at Los Alamos through independent sources. He had associates drive out to the obscure junction near the Nevada test site, where Bob claimed he was picked up by the unmarked bus, finding the location to be as described. He quietly investigated the few names Bob could provide of colleagues or contacts, finding shadows where there should have been people or individuals who clammed up with visible fear when certain topics were broached. The process of building trust was gradual and mutual. For Bob, Knapp represented a lifeline to the normal world, a professional who wouldn't dismiss him out of hand and who had the platform to be heard. For Knapp, Bob represented a source who, despite the incredible nature of his claims, remained consistent under pressure and was willing to submit to scrutiny. Knapp was particularly impressed by Bob's willingness to be proven wrong. He offered specific, falsifiable details, descriptions of the base interior, the hand scanner function, the craft's dimensions, that could, in theory, be checked against any future leaks or disclosures. This was not the behavior of a con man building an unfalsifiable myth. Knapp also recognized the personal risk Bob was taking. He saw the signs of stress, the paranoia that wasn't just paranoia. He understood that by attaching his own professional credibility to this story, he was also stepping into the crosshairs. Their relationship evolved from reporter-source into a cautious alliance. They were two men, one with information and one with a megaphone, standing before a wall of official secrecy, deciding whether to knock. Knapp's journalistic instincts told him the story had the ring of truth, supported by eerie absences and corroborative shadows where direct evidence was impossible to obtain. He made the calculated decision to proceed, to give Bob's account a serious, sober platform. He believed the public deserved to hear it and judge for themselves. But even Knapp couldn't have predicted what would happen next. The media firestorm, the orchestrated character assassination, and the strange, violent events that would soon swirl around his source, transforming a local news story into an international incident. The night before the first major interview, Bob Lazar sat in a safe location, a storm of nerves and resolve warring within him. He reviewed his notes, not of reactor physics, but of the simple, clear points he needed to communicate. S4, Element 115, the sport model craft, the gravity propulsion, the hand scanner. He practiced stripping the wonder from his voice, delivering the facts with the flat, technical tone of an engineer's report. The nervousness was primal, a fear of the personal obliteration he knew was coming. But the determination was stronger, a cold, focused drive to discharge the moral debt he felt he carried. He had decided, on Knapp's advice, to initially show his face but under controlled conditions, with his voice electronically altered for the first broadcast. It was a compromise between courage and caution, a way to test the waters before fully exposing himself to the tsunami of scrutiny. The interview itself was a surreal, out-of-body experience. Under the bright television lights, speaking to the serious, attentive face of George Knapp, he felt he was watching someone else tell his story. He heard his own altered voice, a robotic echo, describing the indescribable. He focused on the granular details, the feel of the scanner, the weight of the 115 wedges, the dull sheen of the craft's hull. He avoided speculation, sticking to observational facts. When Knapp asked about the implications, Bob kept his answer grounded. The physics we're using is incomplete. This technology shows us that. It was a performance of radical normality about the utterly abnormal. The decision to eventually reveal his full identity was not taken lightly. The initial, anonymized broadcast had already triggered a quake within the UFO community and drawn fierce, instant denials from official channels. The discrediting campaign began swiftly. Murmurs about his educational background, vague statements from former employers. Bob and Knapp realized that for the story to have lasting power, it needed a human face to stand behind it. The shadowy Dennis character from the first reports had to become Robert Scott Lazar. He knew this would unleash the full force of the machine against him, but he also believed it was the only way to anchor the narrative in reality. A face could be attacked, but it could also be remembered, believed, and defended. The broadcast where he went fully public changed everything. Suddenly, the story had a name, a face, a voice. It was no longer an anonymous rumor. It was a specific man making specific, audacious accusations against the most secretive apparatus of the U.S. government. The effect was electric and polarizing. Viewers were captivated by his calm, detailed delivery. The media ecosystem split. Mainstream outlets largely dismissed it as fantasy, while the alternative and burgeoning internet forums exploded with analysis and debate. For the intelligence community, it was a nightmare scenario, a high-credibility insider going public with extraordinarily sensitive information on live television. The hunt, both to discredit him and to contain the fallout, shifted into its most aggressive phase. And with those words, Bob Lazar became the most famous and hunted man in ufology, a household name for the unbelievable, a symbol of the individual daring to challenge the fortress of secrecy. The morning after the full identity broadcast dawned not with the usual desert quiet, but with the low, invasive rumble of news vans and the sharp scent of asphalt heated by idling engines. Bob peered through the blinds of his home to see a small media encampment forming at the end of his driveway. Satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical sunflowers, reporters checking their makeup in handheld mirrors. The surreal normality of his kitchen, the coffee pot gurgling, stood in jarring contrast to the circus outside his door. He was no longer Bob Lazar, physicist. He was Bob Lazar, the Area 51 whistleblower, a public commodity. His private life had ended, replaced by a media narrative he could no longer control. The phone rang incessantly. It was a cacophony of requests, national morning shows, tabloid reporters, radio shock jocks, and the first cold, professional inquiries from what sounded like government public relations officials. He let the machine answer most, hearing the range of tones, from credulous awe to aggressive skepticism. Friends called too, their voices a mixture of confusion, concern, and a wary distance. Some were supportive but bewildered. Others were clearly grappling with the idea that the man they knew might be either a world-class liar or a man who'd touched something unimaginable. The conversations were stilted, filled with long pauses where unaskable questions hung in the air. The most difficult reactions came from family. There was fear, primarily. Fear for his safety, fear for theirs, fear of the unknown world he had dragged into their living room. There was also embarrassment and a desperate desire for normalcy that his actions had permanently shattered. A chasm opened between his lived reality and theirs. They loved him, but they couldn't fathom the burden he carried or the danger he claimed. He saw in their eyes the unspoken question, "Why did you have to tell?" He had no answer that could bridge the gap between the cosmic scale of the secret and the simple, human desire for a peaceful life. He had crossed a point of no return not just for himself, but for everyone connected to him. In that first chaotic morning, a profound loneliness settled over him, deeper than any he'd felt in the silence of S4. There, he was alone with a secret. Now he was alone because of it. The world was watching, talking, debating him, but he was isolated at the center of the storm. His truth had become a spectacle, his credibility a public battleground. The quiet scientist who just wanted to understand how things worked had been transformed into a controversial public figure, a symbol in a debate he never asked to lead. He made coffee he didn't drink, staring at the closed blinds, listening to the muffled sounds of the world outside waiting for him to emerge and perform his role. But media attention was the least of his problems. The public circus was a distraction, a sideshow. The real, silent work of his destruction had already begun in the shadowy backrooms of records departments and personnel offices, a process far more efficient and chilling than any talk show debate. The attack on Bob Lazar's credibility was not a messy, public shouting match. It was a clean, surgical, administrative extermination of his past. It began subtly, then accelerated with terrifying efficiency. First, curious journalists and researchers trying to verify his background hit walls. Calls to the personnel office at Los Alamos, where Bob had been a contracted technician, yielded vague, non-committal responses. Then, requests for confirmation were met with outright denials that any employee named Robert Lazar had ever worked there on sensitive projects. His name vanished from internal directories. Colleagues who might have vouched for him suddenly developed impeccable amnesia or were transferred to unknown locations. The academic erasure was even more audacious. Bob had claimed coursework at MIT and Caltech. Reporters contacting the registrar's offices of these prestigious institutions received formal, written statements. No record existed of a Robert Scott Lazar attending or taking courses. Yearbooks were checked. His face was not there. Alumni associations had no record. It was a perfect, airtight negation. To the world, it looked like the clearest proof of fraud, a man lying about his education. But to Bob, it was proof of something far more sinister, the ability of a powerful, covert program to reach into the sanctums of civilian academia and retroactively edit reality. They weren't just calling him a liar. They were making the factual basis of his life untrue. His professional credentials seemed to evaporate. His jet car business, his photo lab, documents became difficult to locate. Licenses, permits, and mundane paperwork were suddenly lost or archived in ways that made them inaccessible. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each vanished record was another brick removed from the foundation of his credibility. The public saw a man with a sensational story and no paper trail to support his claims of being the qualified scientist he said he was. The effect was brilliantly corrosive. It shifted the debate from, are his claims about S4 true, to who is this unverified person making these claims? It made him an easy target. The psychological impact of this erasure was profound. Bob found himself in the impossible position of trying to prove a negative, to prove he had existed in places that now officially stated he had not. He possessed personal mementos, a pay stub, a course syllabus, photographs of himself at Los Alamos. But these were dismissed as forgeries or inconsequential. He was being systematically transformed from a person with a history into a ghost with a story. It was a form of gaslighting on a national scale, designed not just to discredit him, but to dismantle his very sense of self. If they could make the world believe he never sat in those classrooms or worked in that lab, what was left of the man who remembered doing so? They were making him a ghost, but they couldn't erase everything. They couldn't erase the knowledge in his head or the one risky piece of physical evidence he had managed to smuggle out from under their noses. Amidst the systemic erasure of his past, Bob held one tangible card, a photograph. It was not of a craft or an alien, but of the hand scanner. During his time at S4, understanding the evidential vacuum he was in, he had taken an immense risk. Using a simple, pocket-sized instant camera he'd smuggled in, he managed to take a single, quick shot of the scanner mounted beside the featureless door. The photo was poor quality by any professional standard. Grainy, slightly blurred from his nervous haste, the colors washed out by the sterile fluorescent light. But it showed something. It showed the curved, seamless plate, the wall mount, the odd, non-reflective texture, and in the corner, part of the improvised plastic overlay with the human hand outline that had been added for users. When he presented this photo to George Knapp and later to the public, it was a moment of defiant evidence. He could describe the scanner in minute, consistent detail, and here was an image that matched that description exactly. It depicted a device that looked like no biometric scanner on Earth. It had no keypad, no screen, no visible lenses or light sources, no brand markings, no seams. To the objective eye, it was an utterly anomalous piece of hardware. For supporters, it was a smoking gun, physical proof that the technology he described was real. It gave a face to the central artifact of his story, transforming it from an abstract concept into a weird, concrete object. However, the photograph's power was also its limitation. What it showed was undeniable, but what it proved was debatable. Skeptics and debunkers went to work. They argued it could be a prototype of a human-made scanner, a prop from a sci-fi movie, or a clever fabrication. They pointed to the graininess and lack of scale, suggesting it could be a close-up of anything from a kitchen appliance to a piece of industrial equipment. The government, when pressed, would offer no comment, a silence that critics interpreted as dismissal rather than confirmation. The photo existed in an evidentiary limbo, too strange to be conventional, yet not definitive enough to be irrefutable proof of extraterrestrial technology. The debunking attempts were often as revealing as the photo itself. Some experts produced laughably poor facsimiles, claiming anyone could make such a thing in a garage, missing the point entirely. The scanner's mystery wasn't its appearance, but its described function. The photograph became a Rorschach test. Those inclined to believe saw confirmation. Those inclined to disbelieve saw a hoax. For Bob, it was a bittersweet trophy. It was real, it was his, and it stood as a personal testament to his truthfulness. But it was also a painful reminder of the asymmetry of his fight. He had one grainy Polaroid. The other side had the full authority of the state, the media establishment, and the power to make records disappear. The photograph was a pebble thrown against a fortress wall. But one photograph couldn't stand against an entire government machinery. A machinery that was now moving from discrediting his past to actively endangering his present, turning his life into a series of frightening, unexplainable events. The professional world that once valued Bob Lazar's skills now treated him as radioactive. The blacklisting was not a formal decree, but a silent, universal understanding that spread through the tight-knit worlds of defense, contracting, and advanced physics. Job applications to laboratories, engineering firms, or even technical colleges vanished into a void, generating no interviews, not even polite rejections. Phone calls from headhunters, once occasional, ceased entirely. When he leveraged old contacts, the conversations were short and furtive. "Bob, it's just not a good time," they'd say, the unspoken reason hanging in the silence. His name had become synonymous with controversy and security risk. No institution, no matter how open-minded, wanted the media circus or the potential government scrutiny that hiring him would invite. His inability to find work in his field was a particularly cruel twist. The very expertise that had gotten him into S4, his hands-on knowledge of advanced propulsion and physics, was now the expertise no one would touch. He was overqualified for menial jobs and untouchable for professional ones. The scientific community, which prides itself on evidence and peer review, had judged him not on his technical descriptions, but on the officially sanctioned narrative that he was a fraud with fabricated credentials. To embrace his story was professional suicide. To hire him was institutional heresy. He was exiled from the tribe of rational inquiry for daring to bring back a report from a realm the tribe had deemed impossible. Financial struggles followed swiftly. Savings dwindled. The modest life he'd built began to fray at the edges. Bills became a source of constant low-grade anxiety. The financial independence he'd enjoyed as a skilled technician and small business owner evaporated, replaced by a precarious existence. This economic pressure was a deliberate, if indirect, form of punishment. It sent a clear message to any other potential whistleblowers. Speak out, and we will not just ruin your reputation. We will unravel the fabric of your daily life. The price of credibility loss was measured in emptied bank accounts, worried glances from his wife, and the humiliating scramble to make ends meet in a society that now saw him as a punchline or a pariah. The totality of this professional destruction was designed to break his spirit. It attacked his identity as a capable, self-reliant man and provider. It sought to prove that the truth was not just dangerous, but impoverishing. Every closed door, every silent phone, every strained budget meeting was a reinforcement of the lesson. You should have stayed silent. They transformed his courage into a liability, his knowledge into a curse. He was a living cautionary tale, walking proof that the system could and would erase a person's place in the world if they threatened its deepest secrets. It was a slow, grinding form of violence, meant to isolate him and force him into recantation or despair. Yet the physical threats were still to come, a more brutal and direct form of enforcement that would prove the stakes were far higher than just a ruined career. The knock on the door was not polite. It was a rapid, percussive pounding that shook the frame. Before Bob could fully answer, federal agents, their jackets emblazoned with the seals of multiple agencies, pushed their way inside. The atmosphere shifted instantly from one of tense domesticity to one of controlled, legalized invasion. The agents moved with practiced efficiency, their faces set in masks of impersonal authority. They presented a warrant, the language broad and ominous, citing potential violations of the Espionage Act and theft of government property. The document was a blanket, allowing them to turn his home inside out. The seizure was thorough and devastating. They took boxes of personal documents, bank records, old correspondence, technical notes from his Los Alamos days that were now deemed classified. They confiscated his personal computer, disks, and even mundane electronics. They emptied filing cabinets, flipped through books, and examined every piece of paper. The agents asked pointed, aggressive questions about the photograph of the hand scanner, about his contacts with journalists, about missing materials from S4. The real motivation hung, unstated, in the air. This was not a search for evidence of a crime. It was an operation to dismantle his ability to fight back, to terrorize him, and to send an unequivocal message of dominance. The alleged reasons cited in the warrant were a thin veneer over the real intent. Claims of national security and classified material recovery were the legal tools used to justify a psychological and tactical assault. They weren't truly looking for a specific stolen blueprint or sample of element 115. They were looking to dismantle his archive, to sever his connections, and to demonstrate their absolute power over his private life. The invasion of his home, the most fundamental zone of safety, was meant to shatter any remaining sense of security. It was a show of force designed to make him feel perpetually vulnerable, to prove that no door could keep them out. Bob stood amidst the chaos, a profound sense of helplessness washing over him. To resist was to invite immediate arrest. To protest was futile. He could only watch as agents handled his personal life with gloved hands, treating his family's home as a crime scene. The violation was absolute. It wasn't just about the seizure of property. It was the seizure of dignity, of privacy, of the notion that a citizen had rights that could stand against the momentum of a state invoking secret laws. The raid was a physical manifestation of the warning he'd received on the phone, translated from threat into action. It was the system flexing, showing him the machinery behind the curtain of discreditation. But they didn't find what they were really looking for. They didn't find his resolve, and they didn't find the one thing he had wisely kept separate, the foundational, memorized knowledge of the technology that couldn't be boxed and tagged. In the aftermath of the raid, a deeper, more profound silence descended. The isolation was no longer just professional or legal. It became profoundly personal, a chill that seeped into his relationships. Friends from his old life, already wary, now stopped calling altogether. The sight of federal agents carting boxes out of his house was the final straw for many. Association with him was no longer just socially awkward. It felt legally perilous. Invitations dried up. Conversations at the rare chance encounter became painfully brief, eyes darting away, excuses hurriedly made. He had become a social contagion, and people instinctively distanced themselves to preserve their own normalcy. Family tension reached a breaking point. The stress of the raid, the constant fear, and the relentless financial pressure created fractures. While some family members stood by him with dogged loyalty, others pleaded with him to stop, to recant, to just let it go for the sake of peace and safety. The very act of his truth-telling was seen by some as an attack on the family's stability. Holidays became minefields of unspoken accusations and strained smiles. The love was still there, but it was now intertwined with resentment, fear, and exhaustion. He had brought the storm home, and not everyone in the house agreed the truth was worth the tempest. Even within the UFO community, his reception was mixed. While many embraced him as a heroic whistleblower, others were fiercely skeptical, critiquing every inconsistency in his story, often parroting the very discrediting points put out by the government. He found himself having to prove his bona fides to people who believed in flying saucers, but doubted his specific saucer. He was both a celebrity and a suspect within his own reluctant tribe. This conditional acceptance was its own form of loneliness. He was a figurehead, not a peer. The community wanted his testimony, but few could truly comprehend the weight of his lived experience or the personal cost he continued to pay. Yet, within this crushing solitude, a brittle, resilient strength began to form. Bob retreated inward. The silence around him became a space to think, to refine his story, to anchor himself more firmly in the details he knew to be true. He realized that the isolation, while painful, had a perverse strategic value. With fewer personal connections, there were fewer vulnerabilities for them to exploit. The threats against his family were horrific, but the slow severing of his social world meant there were fewer levers left to pull. His world had shrunk to a small, fortified core. In this reduced state, he found a grim clarity. The noise of the world, the media, the debunkers, the fearful friends, faded into background static. The core facts remained. The hum of the scanner, the curve of the craft, the weight of the 115. He was alone with the truth, and that truth, in its stark simplicity, became his sole companion and his unshakable foundation. Because being alone meant they couldn't use anyone else against him. It meant the only person they had to break was him, and on that barren, internal ground, he decided to make his stand. Among Bob Lazar's array of extraordinary claims, his assertion about element 115 stands as the most starkly, scientifically verifiable. In 1989, when he first went public, he described working with a stable, super-heavy element used as fuel in the alien reactor. He called it element 115. To the scientific establishment of the late 1980s and early 1990s, This claim was laughable on its face. The periodic table ended at element 109, and the very concept of a stable, super-heavy element was considered a pipe dream. These elements, created atom by atom in particle accelerators, were notoriously unstable, decaying in milliseconds. Mainstream science dismissed Lazar's 115 as pure science fiction, another clear mark of a fabulist weaving plausible-sounding technobabble. The vindication, when it came, was slow and partial, but it carried the weight of empirical fact. In 2003, a team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna successfully synthesized a few atoms of element 115, now officially named moscovium. Its properties were as theoretical physicists predicted. It was highly unstable, decaying in a fraction of a second. This was, to Lazar's critics, the final nail in his coffin, proof he was wrong, as the element was not stable. However, for Lazar and his supporters, the synthesis was a double-edged confirmation. He was right about the existence of the element itself, years before mainstream science acknowledged it was even possible to create. His error, or the point of contention, was in the isotope. Here lies the crucial nuance. Elements come in different isotopes, variants with the same number of protons but different numbers of neutrons. The isotope synthesized in 2003 was not stable. Lazar claimed the isotope he worked with, likely with a different neutron count, was stable, or stable enough to be machined into wedges and used. This remains unproven and unverified by open science. The vindication, therefore, is profound but incomplete. It proves Lazar was discussing real, cutting-edge nuclear physics concepts years ahead of public disclosure, but it does not prove his specific application of them. It shifts the debate from he made up a fake element to he described a real element, but claims a specific, stable isotope we haven't confirmed. This scientific saga exemplifies the entire Lazar controversy. He is consistently positioned just beyond the neat boundaries of easy verification. His claims contain a kernel of startlingly prescient truth wrapped in an unverifiable, extraordinary application. For skeptics, the instability of the synthesized 115 is the gotcha. For believers, the mere fact he named it 14 years before its official discovery is statistical lightning striking in the same spot too many times to be coincidence. It suggests he had access to advanced nuclear research, whether terrestrial or otherwise. But knowing element 115 exists and proving its use as a gravity wave-producing reactor fuel are different things. One is a remarkable piece of predictive testimony. The other remains in the realm of an unproven, revolutionary claim. The government's attempt to erase Bob Lazar's past focused intensely on his employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Official channels issued denials, and records seemed to vanish. Yet, paper and memory have a stubborn way of surviving institutional edits. Investigative researchers, primarily following George Knapp's lead, unearthed physical evidence that contradicted the official narrative. The most compelling artifact was a 1982 Los Alamos National Laboratory telephone directory. There, listed under Physics for the Monday to Friday Mess and Physics facility, is the name Lazar, R, with a corresponding extension. This was not a public resume claim. It was an internal, mundane document, the kind rarely faked, placing him squarely within the lab's operational structure during the exact time frame he claimed. Further evidence emerged from the pages of the Los Alamos Monitor, the local newspaper. In a 1982 article profiling local entrepreneurs, Bob Lazar is featured alongside a photograph of him with his jet car. The article explicitly identifies him as a physicist at the Mess and Physics facility at Los Alamos. This public, contemporaneous reporting from a reputable local source provided a second, independent pillar of corroboration. It wasn't Bob claiming he worked there. It was the local newspaper reporting on it as established fact years before the S for story ever broke. The article painted a portrait of the man he was before the controversy, a tinkerer and scientist with a day job at one of the nation's most prestigious labs. Witness testimony, though harder to secure, also trickled out. Former colleagues and acquaintances from that period, some speaking anonymously for fear of reprisal, confirmed knowing Bob at Los Alamos. One individual, a contractor, recalled specific technical conversations with him about the particle accelerator. These testimonies were not grand confirmations of UFOs, but simple, human verifications of a shared professional past. They were memories that no database purge could completely erase. Each person who came forward, however hesitantly, was a crack in the facade of total erasure. Naturally, attempts were made to discredit this evidence. Skeptics argued the phone directory listing could be for a different R. Lazar, a statistically slim possibility. They suggested the Monitor article simply repeated Bob's own claims about being a physicist without independent verification from the lab itself, a semantic loophole. The witness testimonies were dismissed as unreliable or from biased sources. The goal was not to provide a better explanation for the evidence, but to muddy the waters enough to sustain reasonable doubt. The strategy was effective in public debate, but logically flimsy. The cumulative weight of the directory, the newspaper article, and the scattered witness accounts forms a coherent, pre-existing paper trail that strongly suggests Bob Lazar was exactly who he said he was, a technician with a physics background working at a high-level government lab. They could erase databases, but they couldn't erase people's memories, and they couldn't find every paper copy of every phone book in every drawer in New Mexico. Determined to provide tangible, witness-backed proof, Bob Lazar took a monumental risk. He organized secret viewing trips to a remote ridge overlooking the Groom Lake area, the back door to Area 51. He invited a small group of trusted friends, including investigative journalist George Knapp. His promise was specific. On certain Wednesday nights, you would see something extraordinary. The location itself was a statement. It was a known spot for aviation buffs to watch for exotic aircraft. But Bob was promising something different. He didn't just bring them to see strange lights. He brought them to see a specific, predicted phenomenon. The events that unfolded on those cold desert nights became legendary in UFO lore. On multiple occasions, Bob's group witnessed precisely what he said they would. From the darkness over the highly restricted test range, a bright, disc-shaped object would rise. It did not behave like any conventional aircraft. It moved with the bizarre kinematics Bob had described. It could hover in absolute silence, shoot across the sky with instant acceleration, make sharp, right-angle turns without any arc, and then vanish silently into the blackness. The movements defied the physics of inertia and aerodynamics. Most critically, there were multiple, credible witnesses present each time, including a seasoned journalist with no prior UFO agenda. They saw it together, eliminating the possibility of a solitary hallucination or misinterpretation. The witnesses weren't just seeing a UFO. They were seeing the UFO, performing the exact maneuvers Bob had detailed based on his claimed understanding of its gravity propulsion. It was a public demonstration of the technology's capabilities, albeit from a great distance. This was not a fuzzy light in the sky. It was a structured craft exhibiting controlled, intelligent flight of an impossible nature. For those present, it was a transformative experience. For Knapp, it shifted the story from an incredible personal testimony to a corroborated event. He had seen with his own eyes the technological magic Bob had described from the inside. These viewings served as powerful validation. They proved that something matching Bob's descriptions was being tested in that airspace on a predictable schedule. It connected his internal, secret knowledge to an external, observable reality that others could share. It was evidence that could not be explained away as a paperwork error or a memory fault. It was a shared sensory experience that anchored his story in the physical world. However, This powerful act of demonstration came at a severe cost. By bringing witnesses to a covert test, he was not just leaking information. He was orchestrating a security breach in real time, leading unauthorized persons to witness a classified military operation. It was a direct, brazen challenge to the program's secrecy, but bringing witnesses would prove to be a costly mistake. It validated his story, but it also painted the brightest possible target on his back, inviting a response far more aggressive than discreditation or legal harassment. Bob Lazar's narrative was not a vague tale of lights in the sky. It was a granular, technical briefing. He provided specific, verifiable details about the S-4 facility that went far beyond public knowledge at the time. He described its location not just as near Area 51, but as being built into the side of a mountain range called the Papoose Mountains, south of the main Groom Lake complex, a detail unknown to the public in 1989. He outlined the facility's layout, a series of 9 large hangar bays built at an angle into the mountain, with the doors disguised to look like the natural rock face from the outside. This matched later descriptions from other sources and even satellite imagery analysis that would, years later, show anomalous structures in that exact area. His descriptions of the craft's interior and systems were laden with specific, accurate technical terminology. He spoke of a gravity amplifier and reactor in ways that aligned with theoretical concepts in advanced physics, but with an applied engineering twist. He described the 3 gravity generators arranged in a triangular configuration beneath the craft, the seats and controls seemingly molded to the pilot's physiology, and the complete absence of traditional wiring, replaced by what looked like light-conducting waveguides embedded in the material itself. He mentioned the craft's active camouflage ability to visually blend with its surroundings, a concept that was pure science fiction in 1989 but has since become a serious area of military research. These weren't terms plucked from popular sci-fi. They were functional descriptions of a working system. Perhaps most compelling was his knowledge of obscure, compartmentalized security procedures. He described being transported in a windowless bus with blacked-out windows, the specific route involving a stop at the remote Janet airline terminal at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas used to ferry workers to the test site. He detailed the multi-layered badge system and the infamous hand scanner itself. This was insider knowledge of logistics and security, the mundane, boring, yet highly classified machinery of secrecy. An outsider fabricating a story would likely focus on the sensational craft. Only someone who had been through the process would remember and think to describe the tedious, dehumanizing protocol of getting to work. This corpus of specific, later corroborated information constitutes powerful, albeit circumstantial, evidence. It demonstrates that Bob Lazar possessed a depth of knowledge about the location, layout, security, and technological concepts associated with a secret base that simply wasn't available in the public domain in the late 1980s. While some details could theoretically have been gleaned from other classified leaks or through meticulous research, the cohesive, first-hand nature of his account, delivered with the casual confidence of experience, is difficult to dismiss entirely. It suggests he was exposed to a highly classified environment dealing with exotic technology. Yet skeptics demanded more. They always demanded more. They argued that some details could have been contaminated by later research, or that a brilliant fabricator could have woven together disparate bits of real classified leaks. The absence of a single, undeniable smoking gun document with his name on it from S4 allowed them to maintain that his technical knowledge, while impressive, was not definitive proof. In an effort to bolster his credibility in a realm where documents were disappearing, Bob Lazar voluntarily submitted to multiple polygraph examinations administered by experienced, independent experts. The results, consistently, indicated he was being truthful when discussing the core of his story. In key sessions, he was asked direct, critical questions, Did you work at a secret facility called S4? Did you see alien spacecraft there? Did you work on an anti-gravity propulsion system? According to the examiner's analyses, his physiological responses, heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, galvanic skin response, showed no significant signs of deception when he answered yes. For many, this was a powerful, scientific-looking seal of approval. The questions were designed to bypass semantics and get to the heart of his experiential claims. They didn't ask, is element 115 stable? A scientific fact he could be wrong about. They asked, did you personally handle a material described to you as element 115? And did you believe it to be a stable isotope? This distinction is crucial. The polygraph measures belief and the stress associated with lying about one's own experiences, not the objective truth of the experiences themselves. The test suggested Bob genuinely believed he had done and seen what he claimed. Skeptics and debunkers immediately attacked the validity of the polygraph itself. They rightly pointed out that polygraphs are not infallible. They measure arousal, not truth, and can be beaten by sociopaths or the highly trained. The results are also highly dependent on the examiner's skill and the question formulation. The scientific community largely rejects polygraphs as reliable evidence. These are fair and important criticisms. A past polygraph is not proof of extraterrestrial visitation. It is, at best, evidence that the subject is not intentionally fabricating their narrative at the moment of the test. Therefore, what the test could prove was limited but significant. They could not prove alien craft exist. They could, however, address the primary accusation levied against Lazar, that he was a conscious, intentional liar crafting a hoax for fame or profit. The polygraph results consistently countered that specific charge. They indicated that, on a physiological level, Bob Lazar displayed the markers of a person recounting what they believed to be a true memory. This forced skeptics to shift their argument from he's lying to more nuanced positions like he's deluded, he was the victim of an elaborate hoax, or he's telling a metaphorical truth. The polygraphs placed a hurdle in the path of the simplest, most damning dismissal. They added a layer of complexity to the puzzle, suggesting that whatever the objective reality, Lazar's subjective experience was one of profound conviction. But even passing a polygraph couldn't convince everyone. In a story this extraordinary, people's priors, their pre-existing beliefs about the world, often outweighed any single piece of evidence, no matter how intriguing. The debate simply moved to a new battlefield, the unwavering consistency of his story over decades. Over 30 years, from his first interviews with George Knapp in 1989 to podcasts and documentaries in the 2020s, Bob Lazar has been questioned, cross-examined, challenged, and scrutinized thousands of times. Through this relentless gauntlet, the core architecture of his story has remained remarkably stable. The key pillars, his recruitment, the S4 location, the 9 hangars, the disc-shaped sport models, the hand scanner, the gravity propulsion based on element 115, the Wednesday night test flights, have been reiterated without major contradiction. In a world where memory fades and liars typically struggle to keep their fiction straight, Lazar's account has demonstrated a fossil-like durability. This isn't to say the story is perfectly static. Over time, like anyone recalling complex events, he has added small details or clarified points, what memory researchers call remembering more. He might elaborate on the texture of a seat inside the craft or the demeanor of a particular supervisor. These additions are natural to genuine memory recall, where new associations can bring forgotten specifics to the surface. They are not the wild, plot-altering retcons or glaring contradictions that typically plague long-running hoaxes. His story has grown in resolution, not changed in plot. This consistency stands in stark contrast to the known behavior of fabricators. Liars, especially those telling complex, improvised lies, often introduce significant inconsistencies under pressure. They forget details they invented, change timelines, or alter character motivations. Their stories tend to evolve to address new criticisms, creating a shifting narrative. Lazar's account has not done this. He has stuck to the same, specific, and often inconvenient details, like the missing educational records, even when they have been used against him. This stubborn adherence to a story that has caused him immense personal suffering suggests either a deeply ingrained delusion or a bedrock of real experience. The test of time is one of the most powerful, if subtle, forms of evidence. A hoaxer might maintain a lie for a few years for fame or profit, but it is exceedingly rare for someone to dedicate their entire adult life to a detailed, personally destructive fabrication, enduring blacklisting, harassment, and ridicule, while never cracking, never confessing, and never significantly altering the tale. The personal cost Bob Lazar has paid is astronomical. If it were a hoax, the rational move would have been to walk away from it decades ago, to admit a mistake or a youthful exaggeration, and to try to rebuild a normal life. He has never done so. His consistency is not the consistency of a rehearsed actor, but the consistency of a man anchored to a traumatic, formative, and, to him, indelibly real experience. In a case where physical proof is maddeningly elusive, where records vanish and witnesses fall silent, the unwavering narrative itself becomes a data point. It is the story of a man who cannot, or will not, change his tune, regardless of the consequences. And perhaps that consistency is the most compelling evidence of all, a testament not necessarily to the objective truth of alien spacecraft, but to the profound, unshakable reality of Bob Lazar's own lived truth. In the vast, often nebulous landscape of UFO lore, where stories can be ethereal and evidence fleeting, Bob Lazar's hand scanner stands apart as a concrete, graspable icon. It has transcended its role as a mere detail in his testimony to become shorthand for real alien technology within the community. When enthusiasts debate the legitimacy of various claims, the question often arises, is there a hand scanner in this story? Meaning, is there a specific, tangible, weirdly mundane, yet inexplicable piece of hardware that grounds the fantastical in the physical? The scanner became the archetype for that category of evidence, the alien artifact you could almost touch. Its appearance in UFO discourse is ubiquitous. It's referenced in documentaries, analyzed in blogs, and depicted in illustrations and recreations. It serves as a mental anchor. While spacecraft are distant and cosmic, a door lock is familiar. Everyone has used a keycard or entered a PIN. The scanner takes that universal experience and twists it into something profoundly other. This relatability is key to its symbolic power. It's not a city-sized mothership. It's a piece of office security, making the alien presence feel not just vast, but integrated, practical, and disturbingly routine for its users. It suggests a civilization so advanced that the miraculous is mundane. This piece of technology captured the collective imagination precisely because of its described duality, utterly functional yet utterly inexplicable. It performed a boring task, opening a door, in a magical way, reading your essence. It represented the perfect fusion of the alien and the everyday. It fed the human need for tangible proof in a field drowning in blurry photographs and vague testimonials. The scanner was something you could describe with precision: its size, its feel, its hum, its function. It offered a specific engineering puzzle to solve, which appealed to both the logical and the wonder-seeking parts of the mind. It was proof you could build a mental model of. The symbol thus fulfills a deep psychological craving. Faced with the incomprehensible scale of the cosmos and the possibility of other intelligences, humans instinctively seek a touchstone, a relic. The hand scanner became that modern relic. It's a piece of the true cross for the age of technology, a fragment that promises the whole story is real. Believing in the scanner allows one to believe in the crafts, the reactors, and the entire staggering narrative, because it feels like the one piece of the puzzle that couldn't have been invented. It's too oddly specific, too technical, and too boringly perfect. It represents the hope that the universe's secrets aren't just energy and void, but are encoded in devices, in objects we can one day understand. But symbols have power, sometimes dangerous power. They can inspire, but they can also be used to divide, to create orthodoxies, and to turn a piece of disputed evidence into an article of faith, with all the fervor and conflict that entails. The timeline is provocative. Bob Lazar first described the alien hand scanner, a device that read a deep, holistic biological signature, in 1989. At that time, human biometrics were in their infancy. Fingerprint scanners were bulky, expensive, and rare, used only in high-security government facilities. Retinal scanners were the stuff of science fiction. The concept of using the unique patterns of veins in your hand, your bone density, or your bioelectric field for identity verification was not part of the commercial or even advanced military tech conversation. Yet, in the decades that followed Lazar's revelation, the world witnessed a biometric revolution. Today, we unlock our smartphones with our faces or fingerprints. Airport security uses facial recognition and iris scans. Advanced research explores gait analysis, heartbeat signatures, and even brainwave patterns for identification. The direction of travel has been toward multimodal biometrics, combining several biological markers for greater security, moving beyond the superficial fingerprint toward a more complete biological profile. This trajectory eerily mirrors the capabilities Lazar ascribed to the S for scanner over 30 years ago. The similarities are not in the specific technology. We use cameras and lasers, not gravity resonance, but in the conceptual goal, flawless, unhackable identification based on the immutable facts of the body. This parallel invites a tantalizing, speculative question: technological leapfrogging. The theory suggests that recovered exotic technology doesn't need to be fully understood to inspire advancement. Simply knowing that a certain capability is possible, such as perfect biometric security, can redirect an entire field of research. Scientists and engineers, aware of such a goalpost from classified briefings or leaks, might pursue it with renewed vigor and different approaches, effectively leapfrogging past incremental steps. The hand scanner wouldn't be reverse-engineered in a lab. Its mere existence, as a concept in the minds of those with clearance, could have acted as a North Star for DARPA and private sector R&D. Is this coincidence or indirect reverse engineering? Skeptics rightly point out that the drive for better security is a natural, independent technological progression. The miniaturization of sensors and advances in computing power alone explain the biometric boom. The correlation could be just that, a correlation. Yet, for those who find Lazar's story credible, the timing and conceptual alignment are deeply suggestive. It raises the ghost of a possibility that some of the foundational ideas guiding our technological present were not born solely of human genius, but were seeded by the study of artifacts that demonstrated what was ultimately achievable. It implies our tech tree might have been grafted with a strange, advanced branch. Could the technology in your smartphone have alien origins? Not the circuitry itself, but the underlying concept that your face is your key, that your body is a code, a concept that, in 1989, was described in detail as a functioning reality in an underground hangar, decades before it became a reality in your pocket. For the global community of UFO believers, Bob Lazar's hand scanner is not just another story. It is foundational evidence, a cornerstone of modern belief. It resonates so powerfully because it bypasses the typical weaknesses of UFO claims. Most encounters are transient, subjective, and lack physical evidence. They are lights in the sky or fleeting shapes. The scanner is none of those things. It is a thing. It was interacted with repeatedly. It can be described with the dry specificity of an engineer's manual. Its dimensions, its texture, its operational feel, its sound. This specificity lends it a credibility that stories of abductions or distant sightings often lack. It feels reportable, like evidence in a court of law. This detail is what sets it apart from vague alien claims. Lazar didn't say they had advanced doors. He described a specific device with a specific function and a specific, inexplicable mechanism. He gave it a purpose within a larger operational system, securing the most sensitive lab. This contextual integration makes it feel real. A hoaxer might invent a flashy ray gun. They are less likely to invent a boring, perfect door lock and explain its role in daily-based logistics. The scanner's very mundanity within its context is its greatest strength as evidence. It's the sort of odd, technical detail that rings true. For believers, the hand scanner acts as a keystone. If one accepts that the scanner is a real description of a real object, then the entire edifice of Lazar's story, and by extension, the reality of recovered non-human technology, becomes vastly more plausible. It provides a mental hook on which to hang the rest of the incredible narrative. The emotional investment in this proof is immense. It represents validation in a field often met with ridicule. To believe in the scanner is to believe that the truth is not just out there, but that it has been touched, used, and described by one of us. It transforms ufology from a study of mysteries into a study of a hidden, but physically tangible, history. This shared belief in the scanner creates a powerful sense of community and intellectual solidarity. It's a shared piece of lore, a common reference point that signals insider understanding. Discussing its nuances, defending its validity, becomes a ritual of belonging. It offers a semblance of certainty in an uncertain field. The scanner is their relic, and Bob Lazar is its reluctant prophet. His consistent, suffering testimony around it lends him a martyr-like status, and the device becomes a symbol of the price of truth. But belief comes with its own costs. It can create rigid orthodoxies, where questioning the scanner's literal truth is seen as heresy. It can lead to bitter divisions within the community itself, between those who accept Lazar's account wholeheartedly and those who see it as a compelling but flawed piece of a larger puzzle. The hand scanner, meant to be proof, can also become a line in the sand. The skeptical response to the hand scanner claims follows a multi-pronged, rationalist strategy designed to dismantle the story without needing to prove an alternative. The primary argument is one of source. They contend Lazar's description is not of a real device, but a clever fabrication inspired by existing science fiction and a dash of extrapolated, real-world science. Skeptics point to the 1966 novel The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton, which features a dramatic laser finger security door that reads the unique capillary pattern in a person's finger, a concept publicly circulating years before Lazar's story. They argue a technically minded person could easily embellish this concept with talk of bone density and biofields, creating a convincing, futuristic-sounding device without any basis in a secret hangar. Central to the skeptical position is the burden of proof. They maintain that an extraordinary claim, the existence of a flawless alien door lock, requires extraordinary evidence. A grainy photograph and a consistent story, they argue, do not meet that threshold. The lack of any recovered hardware, any corroborating blueprints, or any other whistleblower from S for describing the same specific device is cited as a fatal absence. For skeptics, the story resides in the same category as tales of psychic powers or ghosts, personally compelling to some, but failing to produce the reproducible, physical evidence demanded by the scientific method. This leads to the wholesale rejection of the evidence offered. The Los Alamos directory listing is dismissed as inconclusive. Perhaps he was a low-level contractor with inflated self-importance. The test flight viewings are explained away as sightings of classified human-made experimental aircraft, like stealth drones or lifting body prototypes, whose unusual movements were misinterpreted. The polygraph is rejected as pseudoscience. The consistency of the story is attributed not to truth, but to the stability of a well-rehearsed narrative, a lie told so many times it has become its own reality for the teller. From this viewpoint, every piece of Lazar evidence has a plausible, terrestrial explanation that does not require invoking extraterrestrial technology. Ultimately, many skeptics operate from a foundational worldview that such technology is impossible, making any evidence for it inherently suspect. They see the hand scanner story as a modern myth, a technological tall tale that satisfies a human desire for mystery and significance in an increasingly known world. The debate, for them, is not about analyzing evidence of aliens, but about analyzing the psychological and sociological reasons why people believe such stories in the face of thin proof. They view the entire Lazar phenomenon as a case study in belief, not in physics. Yet even skeptics can't explain away everything. The eerie, predictive accuracy of his Element 115 claim, the specific, later corroborated geographical details of S4, and the sheer, enduring personal cost he has paid continue to linger as anomalies in a purely skeptical framework, stubborn details that resist easy dismissal as mere fiction or folly. A curious pattern emerges when one lines up the timeline of Lazar's 1989 revelations with subsequent patents and research publications. In the years and decades that followed, patents began to appear for advanced biometric systems that echo, in concept if not in mechanism, the capabilities he described. Patents for multispectral biometric scanners that read beneath the skin's surface, combining fingerprint, vein pattern, and even tissue oxygenation data, were filed. These systems aim for the same holistic biological snapshot Lazar ascribed to the alien device, moving beyond the surface to create a liveness, detection, and deeper identity verification that is harder to spoof. Even more strikingly, research into medical and security applications of bone density scanning advanced. While DEXA machines remained large, scientific papers explored concepts for portable, low-dose systems that could assess bone health or even be used for identification based on the unique trabecular architecture of a person's hand bones, the very architecture Lazar claimed the scanner analyzed. Simultaneously, fringe but serious scientific work progressed on measuring and interpreting the human bioelectric field, often mislabeled as the aura, for diagnostic purposes, researching the weak electromagnetic fields generated by organs and the nervous system. The conceptual pillars of the S4 scanner, subsurface tissue mapping, skeletal analysis, and biofield reading, each found parallel, independent research tracks in our own science. The timing of these innovations is suggestive. Did these fields develop naturally from the miniaturization of sensors and advances in computing? Undoubtedly, that is the mainstream explanation. But the confluence is notable. It raises the question of whether knowledge of the scanner's capability acted as a distant target, influencing the direction of black-budget research. The goal, a single, touch-based device that provides undeniable identification and health data, was demonstrated, according to Lazar, in 1989. Our technology has been marching toward that same goal ever since, albeit via different technological paths like lasers and microprocessors instead of gravity resonance. And some of these technologies emerged from unexpected places. Defense contractors like Northrop Grumman and Raytheon, along with agencies like DARPA, hold patents and run projects in advanced biometrics and novel sensor technology. Universities and private medical tech firms push the boundaries of bone and tissue imaging. The development is diffuse, not traceable to a single source, which is exactly what one would expect if a revolutionary concept had been disseminated within classified circles as a theoretical goal, inspiring multiple independent lines of research across both public and private sectors. This creates a tantalizing, if unprovable, narrative that the ghost of the hand scanner, the idea of it, has been haunting our labs and patent offices for 30 years, silently guiding our own technological evolution toward a destination someone else reached long ago. Even after decades of debate, the hand scanner story leaves profound, tantalizing questions unanswered. The first is one of purpose. Why hand scanners specifically? If the technology was so advanced, why would a civilization capable of manipulating gravity and matter still use a physical door with a biometric lock? This very mundanity is puzzling. It suggests a psychology not entirely alien, a need for compartmentalization, for controlled access, for privacy even among themselves. Or, more pragmatically, it might imply the technology wasn't infinitely versatile. It was a tool for a specific, physical species in a physical environment, with security concerns we would recognize. The fate of the specific device Bob photographed is a maddening mystery. What happened to it? Was it decommissioned, moved to a deeper black site, or does it still sit in that same hallway at a still operational S4? If Lazar's story prompted a security review, it would have been the first piece of equipment replaced or removed. Its current status is a black hole of information. Similarly, are there updated versions of this technology still in use? Has the core principle been refined? If the program continued, one would assume the scanners, like any technology, would have evolved. Do newer models exist that are even more seamless, more integrated? The silence is absolute. This leads to the question of other witnesses. Who else has touched these devices? Lazar claims there were other scientists and military personnel at S4. Have any of them ever come forward, even anonymously, to corroborate the specific experience of using the scanner? The almost total silence from other potential insiders is either a testament to the effectiveness of secrecy and intimidation or a point against Lazar's story. Yet, the few who have hinted at similar knowledge, often in veiled terms, suggest he was not the only one with this specific, strange memory. Finding another person who could independently describe the same inexplicable hum and resonant feel would be transformative. Finally, the scanner forces a broader, more unsettling inquiry. It represents a single, intelligible fragment of a much larger puzzle. If this one device, a mere door lock, embodies such profound scientific advancement, what does that imply about the rest of the technology it was securing? The reactor, the propulsion, the craft's materials? The scanner is the tiny visible tip of an iceberg of implied knowledge. It serves as a calibration tool for the imagination. If this is real, then what else must be possible? It suggests that our understanding of physics, biology, and engineering is not just incomplete, but is perhaps missing entire volumes. And perhaps the biggest question, what else is still hidden? If a door lock can redefine possibility, what truths lie behind the doors it was meant to guard? The hand scanner, therefore, is not an answer, but a key that fits a lock behind which lies not just a room, but a new universe of questions. While no one has stepped forward with the same comprehensive, public defiance as Bob Lazar, a handful of individuals have emerged from the shadows to offer fragments of corroboration, their statements forming a mosaic that supports the existence of a deeply secret program at Groom Lake. These are not fellow physicists giving televised interviews, but voices speaking through journalists, in declassified documents with names redacted, or in anonymous online forums frequented by aviation and aerospace insiders. Their confirmations are often carefully worded, acknowledging Lazar's presence or the strange nature of the work without repeating his most explosive claims. Some have confirmed, on background, that they knew Bob Lazar in a professional capacity in that time and place. A former contractor at the Nevada test site, interviewed by journalist George Knapp, stated he was aware Lazar worked at a special projects area and that his sudden departure was surrounded by unusual secrecy. Another individual, claiming to be a former base employee, anonymously verified details of the facility's layout and the stringent transport system, matching Lazar's descriptions. These are not confirmations of alien technology, but confirmations of the environment, a secretive, compartmentalized world where Lazar's story is geographically and procedurally plausible. Many more remain anonymous, speaking through layers of encryption or trusted intermediaries, fearing professional ruin or worse. Their testimonies, when compiled, reveal a pattern. They describe a culture of extreme compartmentalization, where curiosity was punished and discussing one's work with colleagues was forbidden. They mention anomalous test articles that didn't match any known aircraft and security measures, including advanced biometrics, that seemed disproportionate to any conventional black project. These anonymous accounts create a chorus of whispers, all pointing to something extraordinary happening in that desert, something that defied normal classification. The pattern in these similar descriptions is telling. They don't parrot Lazar's script. They provide independent pieces that fit the puzzle he assembled. One might describe the unnerving silence of certain test flights. Another might mention the bizarre, non-reflective materials they were ordered to handle with special protocols. A third might allude to scientific briefings that introduced concepts not found in any textbook. Together, they paint a picture of a program operating outside standard military R&D channels, dealing with physics and technology that baffled the experts involved. They suggest Lazar was not a lone fabulist, but one of many who were exposed to a reality they were sworn never to discuss. But coming forward meant facing the same fate as Bob: blacklisting, harassment, the erasure of one's professional history, and the constant, nagging fear of more direct retaliation. For most, the price of full disclosure was simply too high, leaving their corroboration as tantalizing, half-heard echoes in the wind. Beyond the scientists and engineers, the story of S4 in Groom Lake is also witnessed by the blue-collar workforce, the security personnel, janitorial staff, and logistics workers who formed the silent, observant backbone of the facility. Their testimony carries a unique weight precisely because of their perspective. They weren't briefed on the science. They were given rules and told to enforce them. A former security guard, speaking anonymously in documentaries, described patrols in areas where the hangar doors were always closed, but from which a low, subsonic hum could be felt in the chest, a vibration that made the fillings in his teeth ache. He was told never to look directly at certain vehicles being moved under tarps at night, and to report anyone who did. Their accounts are limited but hauntingly consistent. They speak of procedures that felt alien even within the world of top-secret military bases. One guard recounted being stationed at an interior checkpoint where identification involved not just a badge, but placing a hand on a smooth, warm plate that didn't feel like metal. He received no explanation. It was simply the procedure. Others mentioned the odd behavior of some scientists, a shell-shocked, distant look, and unwillingness to engage in even casual chat, as if they were carrying a weight too heavy for small talk. They witnessed the intense, sometimes paranoid, reactions of managers to any breach of protocol, no matter how minor. The things they were explicitly told not to discuss were often the most mundane, which made the secrecy feel stranger. Don't talk about the bus schedules. Don't talk about the cafeteria menu on Wednesdays. Don't discuss who you saw entering Hangar 3. This micromanagement of information created an atmosphere where everything was potentially classified, fostering a culture of seeing nothing and saying less. For these workers, the mystery wasn't about theoretical physics. It was embedded in the daily grind of their jobs, in the unexplained rules and the palpable atmosphere of dread surrounding certain parts of the base. Why does their testimony matter? Because they have nothing to sell, no theory to promote, and no scientific reputation to burnish. They are not UFO enthusiasts. They are tradespeople and veterans who took a well-paying security job in the desert and found themselves on the periphery of something they couldn't understand. Their confusion and their steadfast adherence to the rules make them credible. They report observations, not interpretations. They saw strange things, followed bizarre orders, and felt an atmosphere of secrecy that went far beyond protecting a new stealth bomber. Their stories provide the ground-level texture of the secret, the view from the trenches. It confirms that the strangeness wasn't confined to the labs. It permeated the entire infrastructure. And sometimes the most believable witnesses are those with nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking about the odd rules of a job they left years ago. The cost of the secret extended far beyond the chain-link fences of the test site, seeping into the homes and hearts of those connected to the people who worked there. Spouses of scientists and engineers at Groom Lake and its annexes watched their partners change. They saw bright, enthusiastic individuals return home withdrawn, burdened, and emotionally distant. Husbands and wives became islands, unable to share the central experience of their daily lives. Simple questions like, "How was your day?" were met with a wall of silence or a terse, "I can't talk about it." The shared intimacy of a marriage was fractured by a chasm of classified information, creating loneliness within the relationship itself. Children in these families grew up under a cloud of unusual concerns. They learned not to ask daddy about his work. They were coached on what to say, and more importantly, what not to say, to friends, teachers, and even other family members. Birthday parties might be interrupted by a sudden phone call requiring a parent to immediately return to base. There was a constant, low-grade anxiety, a sense that their family was different, living adjacent to a danger or importance they couldn't comprehend. For some, this bred resentment. For others, a protective loyalty. All grew up understanding that some topics were surrounded by an invisible, electrified fence. The stress of living with secrets, of being the keeper of a truth you didn't choose and cannot share, is a corrosive force. Spouses reported signs of what we would now recognize as PTSD, nightmares, hypervigilance, irritability, and a profound distrust of outsiders. The family unit, instead of being a sanctuary, could become an extension of the secure facility, a place where walls were maintained, even between loved ones. The psychological burden on the non-cleared partner was immense, forced to provide support for a trauma they were forbidden from understanding, living with a ghost whose haunting they could never discuss. When someone like Bob Lazar decided to speak, it didn't just shatter his life, it detonated within his family. Relationships were destroyed by truth-telling. The act of going public was often seen by loved ones not as bravery, but as a betrayal of an unspoken pact to protect the family unit from the outside world. It brought the feared scrutiny, the threatening phone calls, and the media circus directly to their doorstep. Marriages collapsed under the strain. Children faced bullying at school. The whistleblower's choice to serve an abstract, greater good often felt, to those closest to them, like a choice to sacrifice the family's peace and safety. Their suffering is the silent, human substrate of the story, the collateral damage in a war over truth. Because the truth doesn't just cost the truth-teller, it extracts a price from everyone who loves them, turning their homes into front lines in a conflict they never enlisted to fight. The story of For isn't just written in the memories of scientists and guards. It's buried in the concrete and rebar of the facility itself, known to the construction crews who poured the foundations and hung the doors. These contractors, specialists in high-security government work, operated under a veil of extreme compartmentalization. A company might be hired to install a specialized ventilation system, another to pour a concrete slab with peculiar reinforcement specifications, a third to install doors of an unusual weight and composition. Each crew worked from blueprints with large sections blacked out, seeing only their specific slice of the project. The specifications they were asked to follow were often bizarre. hinting at requirements no ordinary facility would need. Workers have whispered about being ordered to install power conduits and data lines of extraordinary capacity in walls that were to be 10 feet thick. They've mentioned vibration-dampening floor mounts unlike any used for standard machinery, designed to absorb frequencies from within, not from outside. Some recall installing lighting that produced a strange, shadowless glow, or being required to use non-ferromagnetic tools and fasteners in entire sections of the build. The materials themselves were sometimes unusual, composites that were prefabricated and delivered under guard, with no manufacturing labels. Each worker and company signed non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, of staggering scope and duration, often binding them and their descendants to secrecy in perpetuity. The penalties outlined were not just financial ruin, but prison time under espionage statutes. This legal cage ensured that even a retired electrician, decades later, would feel a chill at the thought of describing the odd wiring junction he installed in a Nevada mountain. The NDAs created a diaspora of silent knowledge, men and women who carried a single, inexplicable detail from their trade career to their grave. These contractors didn't know what they were building, but they knew it was for something beyond the ordinary. The electrician knew the power requirements were for a small city. The HVAC specialist knew the climate control was designed for a sterile, ultra-clean environment, not a machine shop. The concrete foreman knew the blast shielding specifications were for containing an explosion from inside the structure. They held pieces of a puzzle they were never allowed to see completed. Their whispers, traded cautiously among themselves at industry gatherings or in retirement, form a skeleton, the literal bones of a facility whose purpose was as strange as its construction. And each contractor held one piece of a massive secret, a secret whose full shape they could only guess at, knowing it was something the government had gone to extraordinary and bizarre lengths to contain. In the shadowy realm of government secrecy, some of the most compelling corroborations have come from voices that waited until they were almost silenced forever. Deathbed confessions carry a unique, haunting weight. With mortality imminent, the motivations for deception, fear, careerism, greed fall away. What remains is often a raw, unfiltered desire to unburden the soul, to place a final, truthful piece into the historical record before it is lost. For individuals who live their entire professional lives under the weight of a cosmic secret, the approach of death can be the only safe harbor in which to speak. Several such accounts have surfaced, relayed by family members, priests, or close friends. A former Air Force officer, dying of cancer, told his son about being part of a security detail for retrieved vehicles that weren't from here, describing their movement and the atmosphere of awe and terror among the scientists. A retired engineer from a defense contractor, in his final days, confessed to a journalist friend that he had worked on material analysis projects where the sample's atomic structure defied all known physics, and that he had been shown Lazar's famous 1989 interview and told, "This is why you never talk." These final testimonies often provide specific confirmations of details in Bob's claims that were not public at the time. One account confirmed the specific number of hangar bays at a secondary site. Another mentioned the Wednesday night schedule for testing. Perhaps most powerfully, some have revealed information that Bob Lazar didn't know, filling in gaps in the larger picture. One deathbed statement suggested the program had a formal, albeit deeply buried, name and a chain of command that bypassed standard Air Force and CIA structures, reporting to a committee with direct executive oversight. Another hinted at the existence of a biological materials archive separate from the engineering sections, a detail Lazar only alluded to indirectly. These confessions are not proof in a court of law. They are hearsay, often from emotionally vulnerable sources. Yet, their collective pattern is difficult to dismiss. They come from individuals with verifiable careers in relevant fields. They are consistent in tone, not boastful, but relieved, weary, and emphatic about the reality of what they saw. They represent a final breach in the wall of silence, a crack of light from a room about to be sealed forever. They suggest that Lazar's story was not the outlier, but the one that broke the surface, while countless others remain submerged, their truths dying with them. Because when you have nothing left to lose, the truth flows freely, and in their final breaths, these men and women painted fragments of a picture so vast and shocking that they could only bear to describe it as they were leaving the canvas behind forever. Perhaps the most telling evidence in the entire saga is not what has been said, but what hasn't. The sheer number of potential witnesses who have never spoken creates a statistical and psychological anomaly. Consider the scale. If S4 and related programs existed for decades, they would have employed hundreds, perhaps thousands, of personnel, scientists, engineers, security, maintenance, logistics, and administrative staff. In any human organization of that size, especially one dealing with stressful, extraordinary subject matter, leaks are inevitable. Yet, in this case, the silence has been nearly absolute. Beyond Bob Lazar and a handful of anonymous whispers, the vast majority have taken their knowledge to the grave without a word. The methods used to ensure this silence were comprehensive. They began with the lifetime NDAs backed by the Espionage Act, a legal sword of Damocles. This was reinforced by a culture of severe compartmentalization, where individuals knew only their specific task, making a comprehensive leak difficult. Social and professional consequences were brutally enforced. Blacklisting, character assassination, as seen with Lazar, and the ever-present threat of legal action. For those with higher clearances, more personal forms of persuasion were hinted at. Veiled threats against family, the induction of paranoia through surveillance, and the psychological manipulation evidenced by phenomena like the missing Wednesday. The system was designed not just to deter speaking, but to make the very thought of it feel existentially dangerous. From a statistical perspective, this level of sustained silence across such a large, diverse group over so many decades is virtually impossible for a non-existent or trivial program. If Lazar's story were a complete fabrication about a place that didn't exist, one would expect a flood of easy denials from the thousands who supposedly worked there. Instead, the response is a deafening, official silence punctuated by blanket denials and administrative erasure. The few who do hint at the truth do so from behind layers of anonymity or on their deathbeds. This pattern suggests the secret is not just real, but is protected by consequences so severe that they override the basic human impulses to share, to brag, to confess, or to correct the record. Therefore, the silence itself becomes data. It is not the silence of nothingness. It is the pressurized silence of a containment vessel. It tells us that whatever happened at S4 was considered so critical, so dangerous if revealed, that an entire apparatus was built to enforce perpetual quiet upon everyone who came into contact with it. This systematic, multi-generational suppression is arguably more revealing than any single testimony. It proves the existence of a secret worth protecting at any cost. The vacuum of public information is not empty. It is filled with the ghostly presence of all the words that were never said, all the stories that were swallowed, all the witnesses who chose, or were forced, to remain in the shadows. And that silence speaks louder than any confession, a roaring absence that confirms the presence of something immense hidden just beneath the surface of our reality. Before venturing into speculation, we must anchor ourselves to the bedrock of verified facts. This is what we can state with confidence, based on documents, multiple independent verifications, and physical evidence. First, we know Robert Scott Lazar existed as a professional in relevant fields. His listing in the 1982 Los Alamos National Laboratory Phone Directory is a physical document. His feature in the Los Alamos Monitor as a physicist at the Meson Physics Facility is contemporaneous journalism. These facts establish that he was embedded in the high-tech government research community in the early 1980s, contrary to claims he fabricated his entire background. Second, specific elements of his geographical and procedural description have been verified. The location he described as S4 in the Papoose Mountains south of Groom Lake aligns with the area later identified by satellite analysts as containing unusual, angled structures. The existence of the Janet airline terminal at McCarran for ferrying workers to the test site is public record. The extreme security culture of the Nevada test and training range, with its shoot-on-site warnings and relentless secrecy, is well documented. Lazar's descriptions of this environment are accurate. Third, physical evidence exists, though its interpretation is debated. The photograph of the hand scanner is a tangible object. While its origin is disputed, the image itself is real. The fact that multiple, independent witnesses, including a skeptical journalist, observed highly anomalous aerial performances on specific Wednesday nights from a location he designated is an established event. These sightings are recorded in witness testimonies and were significant enough to shape George Knapp's professional involvement. Finally, the timeline holds. Lazar's public emergence in 1989 preceded the official synthesis of element 115 by 14 years. His detailed description of advanced biometrics preceded the commercial biometric revolution. His claims were on the record long before certain geographical details of the area became public knowledge through declassified satellite imagery. The sequence is fixed. He said these things first. This chronological primacy is a fact that must be accounted for by any theory seeking to explain his story. These certainties, his professional footprint, his accurate environmental details, the existence of his photograph and witnessed events, and his prescient timeline, form an indisputable foundation. They prove Bob Lazar was not a fictional character, that he knew specific, obscure details about a secretive location, and that he made startlingly accurate predictions about future science. But certainty only takes us so far. It builds a stage, but it does not tell us what play was performed upon it. For that, we must move from the solid ground of fact to the more nuanced terrain of probability. Building from the established facts, strong circumstantial evidence, and logical inference point towards several highly probable conclusions. First, it is highly probable that Bob Lazar was employed in some capacity within a deeply classified U.S. government program located in the Nevada desert in the late 1980s. The confluence of his verified presence in the defense research world, his accurate knowledge of obscure base logistics, and the immediate, severe retaliation he faced suggests he breached a real secret, not a fictional one. The government's response, erasing records, launching a discrediting campaign, raiding his home, is disproportionate to a mere liar. It is the response to a genuine security breach. Second, it is highly probable that the program he was involved with dealt with technology that was, and perhaps still is, far beyond publicly acknowledged science. The technical descriptions he provided, of gravity manipulation, element 115, seamless material science, are too specific, too coherent, and too ahead of their time to be the product of a layperson's imagination or a con artist's guesswork. The subsequent, independent validation of some of these concepts, the existence of 115, the direction of biometrics, adds significant weight. The simplest explanation, applying Occam's razor, is that he was exposed to advanced research, whether its origin was human or otherwise. Third, the pattern of silence and corroboration makes it highly probable that Lazar was not alone, and that his core story is substantially true. The deathbed confessions, the anonymous contractor whispers, and the few colleagues who have offered veiled confirmations create a consistent backdrop. The statistical anomaly of near-total silence from hundreds of potential witnesses itself argues for the existence of a secret grave enough to enforce that silence. Multiple, Independent sources pointing in the same direction, however faintly, strengthen the probability of a common, hidden reality. Finally, it is highly probable that the U.S. government has engaged in a long-term, systematic effort to discredit and suppress this information. The methods, document destruction, media manipulation, legal threats, and personal harassment, are documented in Lazar's case and hinted at in others. This isn't a conspiracy theory in the pejorative sense. It is a documented pattern of behavior consistent with the protection of a vital state secret. The probability is that the cover-up is real, deliberate, and ongoing, though its ultimate motive, national security, power monopoly, or public unpreparedness, remains debated. Yet probability isn't the same as proof. While the weight of evidence makes these conclusions reasonable and likely, they stop short of the irrefutable, forensic proof demanded by science or a court of law. We are left in the realm of the strongly indicated, the logically inferred, which is where mystery both frustrates and endures. Despite decades of investigation, profound gaps in our knowledge persist, defining the boundaries of the mystery. First and foremost, we do not know the ultimate origin of the technology Bob Lazar described. Was it extraterrestrial? Was it the product of a breakaway human civilization or a previously unknown ancient Earth history? Was it a combination of recovered artifacts and human reverse engineering? The hand scanner proves an advanced, non-human design philosophy, but not the builder's home address. This core question of provenance remains wide open. We are missing the smoking gun piece of physical evidence. Where's the hand scanner itself? Where is a fragment of element 115 or a piece of the craft's hull? Without such an artifact that can be publicly tested and analyzed, the story remains in the realm of testimony. Similarly, we lack the definitive document, a government memo authorizing the S4 program, a payroll sheet with his name on it from that facility, or a declassified report detailing the recovery of a disk. The absence of this paper trail, likely by deliberate design, is a void that cannot be filled. There are also significant gaps in Bob Lazar's own knowledge, imposed by the compartmentalization of the program. He doesn't know what happened to the craft or the technology after he left. He doesn't know the full history of the program or the complete identity of those running it. He doesn't know the intent or current status of the beings who built the devices. His testimony is a snapshot from one man's perspective within a vast, opaque system. We see only what he saw from his workstation. Finally, and perhaps most humbly, we must acknowledge the limits of what can be proven about events that occurred in a black-budget world 35 years ago. Memories fade, witnesses die, documents are destroyed. The standard of proof required to convince a skeptical world, or to force official disclosure, may be forever out of reach. The truth may exist only as a constellation of facts, probabilities, and lived experiences that never coalesce into a single, undeniable verdict. This inherent ambiguity is part of the story's fabric. It forces us to sit with uncertainty, to weigh evidence without a gavel, and to make a personal judgment about what we believe happened in the Nevada desert. Some questions, the biggest ones, may simply have answers that are inaccessible to the public, locked away in vaults of secrecy and time. And perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, not because they are false, but because their truth is too disruptive, too transformative, or too strange to be easily integrated into the world as we know it. The mystery of the hand scanner endures, not as a failure of investigation, but as a testament to the depth of the secret it was designed to guard. The official U.S. government response to Bob Lazar's specific, detailed claims has been a masterclass in strategic ambiguity. They have never issued a point-by-point rebuttal of his story about S4, element 115, or the hand scanner. Instead, the response has been a blanket, bureaucratic non-response. Official spokespeople, when pressed, have typically offered variations of, "We do not discuss classified programs," or Mr. Lazar's claims have no basis in fact, without ever specifying which facts are incorrect or providing an alternative narrative for his documented presence in the world of classified research. This is neither a confirmation nor a detailed denial. It is a dismissal designed to end the conversation. This strategic silence is deeply revealing. A direct, detailed denial would require engaging with the specifics of his story, which could inadvertently confirm classified details or open avenues for further questioning. For example, if they said, "There is no facility with 9 hangars in the Papoose Mountains," they would be making a definitive statement they might have to retract if a satellite photo later surfaced. By saying nothing specific, they maintain what intelligence agencies call plausible deniability. The silence acts as a shield, protecting the underlying facts while publicly casting the claimant into the realm of the unverifiable and the fringe. Historically, this pattern aligns perfectly with how the U.S. government handles genuinely sensitive, game-changing secrets. Consider the Manhattan Project before Hiroshima. Thousands worked on it, yet public silence was absolute. Early leaks about nuclear weapons were dismissed as fantasy. The pattern repeats with later technologies like stealth aircraft. Rumors of invisible planes were ridiculed until the F-117 was officially unveiled. The playbook is consistent: blanket denial, discredit the source, and maintain secrecy until disclosure serves a strategic purpose or becomes impossible to maintain. Lazar's treatment fits this mold precisely, suggesting his information touches on a secret of comparable magnitude. What this silence ultimately suggests is that the government's position is not that Lazar is wrong, but that his disclosures are damaging. If his story were purely fictional, a detailed, factual takedown would be simple and effective. The refusal to provide one implies that such a takedown would either be impossible because elements are true, or would require revealing other classified information, creating a catch-22. The silence, therefore, is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a full container under pressure. It communicates that the topic is off-limits because it is real and it is serious. In the dialogue between a whistleblower and the state's refusal to speak in detail is its most telling form of testimony. Because sometimes what they don't say reveals more than what they do. The decades of non-response to Bob Lazar's specific, verifiable details stand as a giant, echoing absence that implicitly confirms there is something there. Something so significant that the only safe official position is to say nothing at all. For decades, Bob Lazar stood as a solitary, vilified figure, his story an island of extreme claims in a sea of official denial. The landscape began to shift dramatically in the 2010s and 2020s. The 2017 New York Times article revealing the existence of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ADIP, shattered the long-standing official taboo. Suddenly, the U.S. government was admitting it had spent millions studying unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP. Then came the Navy's 2020 formal acknowledgments and the release of 3 now famous cockpit videos: the Tic Tac, Gimbal, and Go Fast, showing objects displaying physics-defying capabilities, instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic speeds without sonic booms, and transmedium travel. These official disclosures have created a profound context for Lazar's story. The objects in the Navy videos move exactly as he described the S-4 sport models moving, with abrupt right-angle turns, rapid acceleration, and no visible means of propulsion. The government's admission that these objects are real, unknown, and demonstrate advanced technology makes Lazar's 1989 claims seem less like science fiction and more like an early, insider description of the very phenomenon the Pentagon is now openly investigating. His narrative is no longer an outlier. It is a precursor. The slow drip of official admission has followed a predictable path. First, acknowledge the phenomenon exists, Navy videos. Second, Admit it represents a potential national security concern, UAP task force. Third, begin to normalize the discussion in Congress with public hearings. What hasn't happened is the final step, attribution. The government still will not say what these things are or where they come from. This careful, incremental disclosure mirrors the containment strategy of the past, but the dam has cracked. The existence of the mystery is now official. For Bob Lazar, watching this unfold has been an experience of bittersweet vindication. The core of his testimony, that the U.S. government is in possession of craft of unknown origin displaying impossible performance, has moved from the realm of tabloid fantasy to the subject of congressional briefings. The technological descriptions he provided are now the subject of serious discussion among physicists and aerospace engineers. Yet, he remains professionally exiled, his name still synonymous with controversy rather than credited as a pioneer. The government that now admits to much of what he said still refuses to acknowledge him, because to do so would be to admit the truth of his most specific claims that point directly to a recovered craft program, a truth still considered a bridge too far for public consumption. And Bob has watched this unfold from the outside, vindicated but still exiled, a prophet whose predictions came true, but whose own identity remains officially erased from the history he helped uncover. As our journey through this story concludes, we return to where we began, not with a bang, but with a touch, the cool, humming surface of the hand scanner. In the end, this unassuming device matters most. It was not the grandest artifact, nor the most powerful, but it was the most intimate. It was the piece of the impossible that a human hand could physically meet, day after day. It served as the daily, ritual proof for Bob Lazar that he was not dreaming. While the craft were spectacular, they were distant, under tarps, objects of study. The scanner was an interface. It was a conversation, however one-sided, between human biology and an intelligence that had mastered it. What it represents goes far beyond technology. It is a symbol of the bridge between the known and the unknown. For believers, it is a tangible relic. For skeptics, it is the most stubborn detail. It represents the human need for proof that can be touched, held in the mind, and described with precision. More importantly, it represents a specific, non-human logic. Its design, reading bone density, biofields, the essence of life, reveals a scientific philosophy where biology, energy, and matter are seamlessly intertwined, a unified theory made manifest in a door lock. It shows us that the builder's understanding of the universe was holistic in a way ours is not yet. The doorway it opened, or more accurately, exposed, was not just a physical one leading to a lab at S4. It was a metaphysical doorway in human consciousness. By describing it, Lazar forced us to consider that the most advanced security system imaginable wasn't about lasers or codes, but about reading the song of your very being. It challenged our assumptions about what technology is and could be. It turned a mundane act, entering a room, into a profound statement about the nature of identity and life itself. In the larger truth of this story, the hand scanner plays the role of the keystone. It is the detail that grounds the fantastic. If you can believe in the scanner, this weird, specific, perfectly engineered object, then the craft, the reactor, the whole staggering edifice of S4 becomes conceivable. It is the entry point into the mystery. It proves that whatever happened, it wasn't vague or mystical. It was technical, material, and real enough to have a perfect door lock. Its legacy is that it turned an abstract story about aliens into a concrete story about a device, and in doing so, made the impossible feel frustratingly, tantalizingly within reach. Because that simple device, designed to read hands, revealed the handprint of something not human, a fingerprint of another intelligence pressed into the hard, cool reality of our world, waiting for us to understand the language in which it was written. Today, Bob Lazar lives a life that is, on the surface, one of quiet, hard-won normalcy. He resides in Michigan, far from the desert skies of Nevada. His professional life is rooted in the tangible and the practical. He runs a successful scientific supply company. His work involves providing equipment and chemicals to labs and researchers, a return, in a way, to the world of applied science, but on his own terms, outside the shadow of government contracts and security clearances. His days are filled with the mundane logistics of business, a world away from the hum of a gravity reactor. His relationship with the story that defined him is one of detached acknowledgement. He no longer seeks the spotlight or fights to convince the world. The frantic energy of the early years has given way to a calm, almost weary acceptance. He grants occasional interviews, often from his own studio, speaking with the measured, technical tone that has always characterized him. There is no bitterness in his voice, only the quiet fatigue of a man who has said everything he has to say, multiple times, and now lets the evidence, and the unfolding world of official UAP disclosure, speak for itself. The story is a fact of his life, a chapter he cannot rewrite, but it is not the entirety of his identity. Public appearances are rare and carefully chosen, often at events where he is among believers or serious researchers. He seems most comfortable in the role of a historical figure, a primary source rather than an active campaigner. The fire of the whistleblower has banked into the steady glow of a witness. He has outlasted many of his detractors and seen the world slowly, grudgingly, catch up to the possibilities he outlined. This has afforded him a certain peace. The fear that once stalked him has receded, replaced by the simple reality of a life lived on the other side of a cosmic revelation. He lives, as he has for decades, in the long shadow of the truth he told. It is a shadow that provides both shelter and cool isolation. He is a man who knows a secret the world is still arguing about, and that knowledge is now a permanent, quiet companion. The chaos has settled. The media vans are gone. The threatening calls have ceased. What remains is a man, his family, his business, and a history that will forever be debated. And he sleeps peacefully, knowing he told the truth. The world's belief was never his burden to carry, speaking was. Having done that, he rests, his conscience clear, his part in the story complete, leaving the rest of us to wonder about the handprint he showed us on the door of a new reality. Bob Lazar's greatest contribution may not be the specifics of Element 115 or the hand scanner, but the sheer, raw courage he demonstrated in speaking at all. In 1989, the topic was cultural poison, a guaranteed career ender, and a one-way ticket to ridicule. By stepping forward, even with his voice altered, he broke a psychological barrier. He showed others, scientists, military personnel, contractors, that it was possible to say the unsayable and survive. He proved that the sky would not fall, even if your world did. His act created a reference point, a case zero for modern whistleblowing on the UFO subject. His courage directly inspired others to come forward. In the years that followed, a trickle, then a stream, of military pilots, intelligence officials, and aerospace engineers began to share their own encounters and knowledge, often citing Lazar as the one who made it conceivable. The witnesses to the 2004 Nimitz Tic-Tac incident, for example, operated in a world where Lazar had already, decades prior, normalized the description of such physics-defying maneuvers. He carved out a space in public discourse where such testimony could eventually be taken seriously by mainstream media, a space that culminated in the 2017 New York Times article. The conversation he made possible is his enduring legacy. Before Lazar, public discussion of UFOs was largely about lights in the sky and alien abduction narratives. He injected hard, technical, engineering-based language into the debate. He forced people to think not about little green men, but about gravitational propulsion, stable super-heavy elements, and seamless material science. He shifted the paradigm from the paranormal to the technological, paving the way for the serious, national security-focused UAP discussion we see in Congress today. He made it a subject for physicists, not just fantasists. The price he paid was everything: his career, his privacy, his peace, his reputation. The prize, however, was something he could not have fully anticipated: the liberation of a truth. He did not just share information. He performed an act of moral and intellectual emancipation, declaring that some secrets are too big to belong to a classified program. His suffering purchased a piece of the public's right to know. While the full truth remains obscured, the fact that there is a serious, global conversation about non-human technology is due, in no small part, to his willingness to stand in the glare and tell his story, regardless of the cost. And because he spoke, others found their voice, creating a chorus where there was once only a frightened silence, turning a solitary act of defiance into the opening chapter of a modern revelation. Look around at the world technology has built in just the last 30 years. We carry supercomputers in our pockets that recognize our faces and fingerprints. We have unlocked the ability to edit the very code of life with CRISPR. We are probing quantum entanglement and machine learning that writes its own poetry. The speed of this advancement is breathtaking, linear progress giving way to what seems like a vertical climb. We accept these marvels as the natural fruits of human ingenuity, but the sheer acceleration invites a quiet, wondering question: where do these leaps really come from? Is it purely our own isolated genius, or are we, perhaps, following a blueprint we glimpsed somewhere? Consider the path of biometrics. In 1989, the idea of a device reading your unique biological essence to grant access was the stuff of alien lore. Today, it's how you unlock your phone. The conceptual leap from a key to a part of your body happened with startling speed. Material science has produced metamaterials that bend light and composites stronger than steel at a fraction of the weight, echoing the descriptions of seamless, weight-defying hulls. Our most advanced drones and hypersonic vehicles push against the very edges of aerodynamics and propulsion in ways that once seemed impossible. This invites a subtle, paradigm-shifting thought. What if some of our innovations are not pure inventions, but rediscoveries? What if the staggering leaps in certain fields, propulsion, materials, energy, biometrics, were catalyzed not just by innate human creativity, but by the secret study of artifacts that demonstrated what was possible? The theory of technological leapfrogging suggests that simply knowing a destination exists can dramatically shorten the journey. The hand scanner, as a described artifact, represented a destination: perfect, holistic biological security. Our science has been racing toward that same destination ever since, albeit on a different path. This doesn't diminish human achievement. It recontextualizes it. It suggests our genius might lie as much in reverse engineering and inspired adaptation as in pure, de novo creation. It asks us to look at the seamless glass of our devices, the instant recognition of our features, the silent power of our batteries, and wonder, are we building our future, or are we reconstructing someone else's past? The next time you interact with a piece of technology that feels like magic, pause for a moment. Consider the journey of the idea that made it possible. And next time you unlock your phone with your finger, remember that in a story from long ago, in a desert buried under secrecy, a man described a door that opened only when it recognized not just a fingerprint, but the song of the bones beneath. An idea so advanced it sounded like fantasy, until our world, slowly and surely, began to turn that fantasy into our everyday reality. As the story of Bob Lazar and the hand scanner settles into the quiet of memory, let your gaze drift upward, past the glow of streetlights and screens, to the true backdrop of this tale, the infinite night sky. The same Nevada sky that watched over S4 stretches over us all, a timeless canvas of velvet black and diamond light. In its vastness, every mystery finds its proper scale. The billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, whisper a simple, mathematical probability: we are not the only ones. The cosmos is too large, too old, and too fertile for Earth to be the sole author of consciousness. This isn't speculation. It is a quiet deduction from the sheer numbers written across the heavens. Contemplating what might still be out there is not an exercise in fear, but in wonder. Civilizations may have risen and fallen while Earth was still molten rock. Others may be just beginning their journey. Some may be biological, like us, building hand scanners and doors. Others may be forms of intelligence so different we could not recognize them as such. Beings of energy, collective minds, or entities that perceive dimensions we cannot. The possibilities are as boundless as space itself. This unknown is not a void. It is a plenum filled with potential stories, technologies, and truths we have yet to imagine. There is a profound comfort in this perspective. Our human struggles, our secrets and cover-ups, our triumphs and failures, are all contained on this tiny, fragile blue marble. The cosmic scale puts our story in its place, significant to us, but part of a much grander, ongoing narrative. The knowledge that we are likely not alone can be a unifying thought, a reminder that beneath all our divisions, we are one species on one planet, peering out into a shared, mysterious cosmos. The stars keep their secrets, but they also hold our future, promising that the story of discovery is far from over. So, when you look up, feel no pressure to solve the mystery. Feel only the calm that comes from facing something truly larger than yourself. The answers are not owed to us. They are gifts we may one day receive, through patience, science, or perhaps another knock on a door from the stars. The universe operates on a timescale of billions of years. Our curiosity is just a flicker within it, but it is a brave and beautiful flicker. And somewhere, among those stars, answers await, not with urgency, but with infinite patience, hanging in the silent darkness, ready for the day when we are finally ready to understand. At its heart, the enduring fascination with Bob Lazar's story, and with the UFO phenomenon as a whole, speaks to fundamental human needs that go beyond evidence and logic. First, and perhaps most deeply, is our desire to not be alone. The cosmic loneliness of being the only intelligent beings in a silent universe is a profound and terrifying thought. The idea that others are out there, watching, visiting, or even just existing, fills that emptiness. It makes the cosmos feel like a neighborhood rather than a deserted house. Belief in a non-human intelligence offers companionship on a galactic scale, assuring us that our song of consciousness has an echo somewhere in the dark. We are also drawn to the appeal of hidden truths. In an age where information seems omnipresent, the notion that profound, world-changing secrets are still kept by powerful institutions is both frustrating and magnetizing. It taps into a deep-seated narrative of the individual versus the system, the truth-teller against the fortress of power. Bob Lazar's story embodies this archetype. Believing him is not just about accepting UFOs. It is about siding with the underdog, championing the right to know, and affirming that no secret, no matter how closely guarded, can remain hidden forever from the human spirit's curiosity. What our belief in such stories says about us is revealing. It shows our capacity for wonder, our refusal to accept that reality is limited to what we currently understand. It demonstrates a hope that the universe is more strange, more magical, and more full of possibility than our textbooks allow. This belief isn't a rejection of science. It is an extension of it, a conviction that science has not finished its work, that its greatest discoveries still lie ahead, perhaps waiting in a desert hangar or encoded in a technology we cannot yet replicate. Finally, there is comfort in the mystery itself. A universe that is fully known is a universe with no room for dreams. The unknown is the space where imagination, hope, and speculation live. It allows us to be perpetual children, gazing up with wide eyes, asking what if. The hand scanner, the craft, the entire S4 narrative exist in that sacred space of what if. They provide a framework for our wonder, a specific story onto which we can project our hopes for a more interesting, more connected cosmos. We cling to these stories not because we are gullible, but because they nourish a part of us that craves magic in a rationalized world. Because believing makes the universe feel less empty, less final, and infinitely more interesting. A story still being written, with our chapter far from the last. Now, let the day's questions soften. Picture the desert as it once was, and as it still is when the world sleeps. Vast, silent, and bathed in starlight. The wind whispers through the sagebrush, carrying away the noise of debate and doubt. The mountains are dark silhouettes against a sky so thick with stars it seems you could scoop them up like sand. In this peaceful stillness, all stories find their rest, the secret and the revealed, the believed and the denied. Here, the hand scanner is no longer a piece of evidence in a trial, but a symbol. It is a symbol of connection, a bridge between two realities that briefly touched in the hidden heart of this ancient landscape. Let the mystery itself be a comfort, not a burden. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to us tonight. Some truths are like those distant stars. We can see their light, but we may never reach them in our lifetime. And that is perfectly all right. The pursuit, the wonder, the act of looking up, these are the real gifts. The story of Bob Lazar and the hand scanner is not a puzzle to be solved before bed. It is a lullaby for the curious mind, a gentle reminder that the world is deeper, stranger, and more wonderful than it appears by daylight. So settle in. Let the weight of the everyday fall away. Breathe in the cool, imaginary desert air. There is no need for answers now. There is only the quiet hum of possibility, a vibration as subtle as the one said to travel up a scientist's arm long ago. A reminder that we are part of something vast and mysterious. Close your eyes and let your mind wander among the stars, across the silent desert, to the foot of a hidden mountain where secrets may still sleep. Rest easy in the knowledge that the universe holds wonders beyond our current grasp, and that tomorrow is another day to look, to question, and to wonder. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere, the truth is waiting to be touched, just like that hand scanner, designed for hands not quite like ours. Sweet dreams.